Welcome to Anonna's creation. Tonight, we journey back, not to the dusty pages of a history book, but to the beating, primal heart of a legend. We travel to the island nation of Crete, a jewel of the sea, ruled not by myth, but by commerce, power, and the unyielding ambition of one man. Before the island of Crete was a unified kingdom, it was a tapestry of wealthy city-states, and the glittering prize of the capital, Knossos, was contested. Two brothers, both lions in their own right, vied for the throne. Marcus, a man of brutal charisma and consuming ambition, and Ryan, his younger brother, known for his piety and the love of the people. The priesthood and the public favored Ryan, but Marcus craved power with a hunger that bordered on divine madness. One stormy night, Marcus stood on the cliffs overlooking the churning, black ocean. He felt the spray on his face and tasted the salt of the tempest. He was losing. The elders were set to announce their choice in 3 days, and the tide of popular opinion was against him. In his desperation, he made a vow, not to the familiar gods of the hearth and sky, but to the unpredictable and terrifying god of the world below the waves, Poseidon, the lord of the deep. Great Poseidon! Marcus roared over the thunder of the surf. You, who shakes the earth and commands the tides. I am your true servant, not my weak-willed brother. The people doubt my divine right. They seek a sign. Give me a sign, Lord of the deep. Show them that I am your chosen ruler. Send me a miracle from your depths, a symbol of your power, and I swear, upon my father's crown and my own life, I will return it to you in sacred sacrifice, honoring you above all other gods. The storm seemed to pause. The wind held its breath. For a long moment, there was only the sound of Marcus's own ragged breathing. Then, the black water far below began to foam, not with the chaos of the storm, but with a strange internal light. The waves parted, and from the depths of the sea, a creature ascended. It was a bull, but it was like no bull ever seen on earth. It was enormous, larger than 3 mortal bulls, with a hide as white as the sea foam it sprang from, and horns that seemed carved from polished mother of pearl. Its eyes were the deep, intelligent, and frightening blue of the abyss. It walked upon the water, its hooves barely touching the surface, and climbed the cliff path to stand before Marcus. It was majestic, terrifying, and undeniably divine. When the dawn broke, the people of Knossos awoke to find the magnificent creature standing placidly in the central plaza, with Marcus standing beside it, his arms raised in triumph. The priests fell to their knees. The people, including Ryan himself, bowed in awe. There could be no more debate. The ocean god had answered. Marcus was crowned King Marcus of all Crete that very day. 4 weeks, the white bull was celebrated. It was housed in a special golden pasture, fed on clover and honeyed oats. It was the symbol of Marcus's reign, the living proof of his divine mandate. The time soon came for the sacred festival where Marcus was to fulfill his vow. The altars were prepared. But as King Marcus stood before the bull on the eve of the sacrifice, his heart was swayed. This was not just an animal. It was a masterpiece. It was the source of his power, the symbol of his glory. To kill it felt like a waste. Surely, a whispering, arrogant voice reasoned in his mind, the great Poseidon would not want such perfection destroyed. He sent it to me. It is my prize. Hubris, the poison of kings, had taken root. King Marcus made a fateful decision. He ordered his herdsmen to find the finest, strongest bull in his personal herds, a magnificent animal by any mortal standard. He had it scrubbed and polished until its black hide shone. On the day of the festival, in a grand ceremony, King Marcus sacrificed the wrong bull, proclaiming it the offering to Poseidon. He kept the divine white bull from the sea, hiding it away in his most distant royal pastures. He thought, in his mortal arrogance, that he could trick a god. He was wrong. Poseidon, lord of the deep, was not mocked. The god's fury was as vast and as cold as the ocean floor. But he would not strike Marcus down. He would not destroy the kingdom. His punishment would be far more personal, more twisted, and more enduring. The curse did not fall upon the king. It fell upon the king's wife, the beautiful and gentle Queen Patricia. It began subtly. The queen found herself unable to sleep. She would walk the palace ramparts at night, her gaze drawn, as if by an invisible string, to the distant pasture where the white bull was kept. At first, it was simple admiration. Then, it became a fixation. She found herself neglecting her duties, her court, even her own husband, consumed by a need to simply watch the creature. This fixation twisted into something dark and unnatural. Poseidon's curse settled into her heart, warping her mind, filling her with a sick, burning, and profane desire for the divine beast. She was horrified by her own thoughts, yet utterly powerless to stop them. The god's magic was absolute. She became a ghost in her own palace, pale and trembling, haunted by a need she could not confess and an obsession that was driving her mad. King Marcus, blinded by his own pride and the duties of his new throne, saw only that his wife had grown cold and distant. He grew angry, believing her to be unhappy with his rule, never once connecting her strange malady to his own broken promise. Desperate and consumed by the divine madness, Queen Patricia summoned the only man in Crete who might be able to help her, though not in the way a sane person would seek help. She summoned David Dalian. David Dalian was not a priest or a physician. He was the kingdom's chief inventor, a master architect and engineer, a man of terrifying, pragmatic genius. He was the man who had designed the kingdom's mighty aqueducts and its ingenious harbor defenses. He was a man who saw the world not in terms of morality, but in terms of problems to be solved. The queen, veiled and shaking, received him in her private chambers. She laid out a fortune in gold and jewels. And then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she told him her cursed secret and gave him an impossible, monstrous commission. She did not want a cure. She wanted a solution. She wanted to fulfill the curse. Dalian was, for the first time in his life, rendered speechless. This was beyond madness. But as he looked at the queen's desperate, tormented eyes, and then at the staggering pile of gold, the engineer in him began to work. It was a challenge. A grotesque, horrifying challenge, but a challenge nonetheless. How could one deceive a divine bull? He agreed. Working in secret, in a locked workshop deep beneath the palace, David Dalian used all his skill. He crafted a hollow frame of light, strong wood. He covered it in the cured hide of a real cow. He set it on bronze wheels, hidden by false hooves. He fitted it with glass eyes and carved horns. He created a perfect, hollow decoy, a wooden heifer so realistic it would fool any animal. A small, hidden door was built into its side. On the night of the new moon, Dalian and two trusted servants wheeled the unholy creation into the golden pasture. Queen Patricia, her face pale as marble, dismissed the servants. Under the cold starlight, she unlatched the hidden door, climbed inside the hollow shell, and was sealed within. The rest is a matter of shadow and shame, a dark whisper in the annals of the kingdom. The divine white bull, itself a creature of instinct, was deceived by Dalian's craft. The cursed will of Poseidon was fulfilled. Months passed. The queen went into seclusion, her difficult pregnancy announced to the court. King Marcus, preoccupied with a trade war, was told his wife was merely frail. David Dalian was paid his fortune and sworn to absolute secrecy, the terror of what he had done settling into his bones. Then came the night of the birth. The screams from the queen's chambers were not those of labor. They were screams of pure, unadulterated terror. The midwives fled, their faces white, babbling of a demon. King Marcus finally stormed into the room, his sword drawn, fearing an assassin. He found his wife, Queen Patricia, collapsed and weeping, utterly broken. And in a bronze cradle, thrashing and snarling, was the result of his broken vow. It was not a child. It was a monster. It had the robust, perfectly formed body of a human infant, but from its neck, where a human head should have been, sprouted the grotesque, oversized head of a bull calf. Its eyes were not the innocent blue of a baby, but the deep, abyssal blue of the white bull, and of Poseidon. It did not cry for milk. It let out a deep, guttural bellow that shook the very stones of the palace. King Marcus stared, his pride, his ambition, and his world shattering in an instant. This was his son. This was his shame. This was Poseidon's reply. He could not kill it. It was, in some monstrous way, of his own bloodline, his wife's child. But he could not let it be seen. It was the living proof of his sin, a walking, bellowing monument to his broken oath. That very night, he summoned David Dalian. The architect arrived, his face gaunt with dread. He had heard the rumors. He saw the king's face, not angry, but dead with cold resolve. Dalian, the king said, his voice void of all emotion. You, with your clever crafts, you had a hand in this problem. Now, you will build its prison. A cage, your majesty? Dalian whispered. No, Marcus growled. A cage can be opened. I want a prison of stone and shadow. I want a building that is itself a puzzle, a maze so complex, so full of twisting corridors and dead ends, that once this thing is placed inside, it can never ever find its way out. I want a place to bury my shame. I want you to build the Labyrinth. And as the first rays of dawn touched the horrified kingdom, David Dalian, the master inventor, took out a charcoal stick and a piece of parchment. With a trembling hand, he drew the first impossible, looping, and inescapable line of the monster's new home. Work began immediately. King Marcus, now a colder, harder man, poured the kingdom's treasury into the project. He diverted the flow of a river and tore a great scar into the earth just outside the palace walls. It was here, deep below the level of the ground, that David Dalian would build his masterpiece of madness. It was not a building, it was an absence of reason. Dalian, haunted by his role in the monster's creation, poured all his genius and all his guilt into the design. He built a structure that actively fought the mind. Corridors were built on subtle, imperceptible slopes, so that one was always walking slightly uphill or downhill, disorienting their sense of balance. The walls were made of dark, polished stone that absorbed the light from any torch and created false, shifting reflections. Hallways turned back on themselves at mathematically precise, impossible angles. There was no center, no outside wall, no logical pattern. The labyrinth was designed not just to hold a beast, but to break the mind of anything, man or god, that entered it. And deep within the palace dungeons, the beast was growing. The creature, which the terrified servants had begun to call the Minotaur, Marcus's bull, was no longer an infant. It possessed an unnatural, rapid growth, fueled by a primal hunger. It had the strength of 10 men and the savagery of a starved wolf. Its bellows of hunger and confusion echoed through the palace at night, a constant, living reminder of the king's sin. Queen Patricia, a hollow shell of her former self, never left her chambers, unable to bear the sound. The day the labyrinth was completed, a dreadful silence fell over Knossos. The great stone entrance, a single dark opening in the earth, seemed to drink the very sunlight. A company of the king's most hardened soldiers, their shields locked and spears leveled, guided the creature from the dungeon. It was a horrific battle. The Minotaur, now a towering monster of muscle and horn, fought them every step of the way, its roars echoing off the city walls. It shattered spears and dented bronze shields, but it was finally forced down the dark ramp and into the maze. As the great stone door was rolled shut, sealing the monster in the darkness, a collective sigh of relief was breathed by the kingdom. The shame was hidden. The nightmare was over. King Marcus, it seemed, had won. He had contained his curse. Years passed. To erase the shadow of the past, King Marcus and Queen Patricia were blessed with a second child. This one was perfect. A human son, whom they named Andrew. Andrew King was everything the Minotaur was not. He was golden-haired, athletic, brilliant, and charismatic. He was the pride of Crete, the undisputed heir to the throne. King Marcus poured every ounce of his affection into the boy, seeing him as the god's forgiveness, his true legacy. The dark, buried secret of the labyrinth was almost forgotten, a bad dream from a different lifetime. When Andrew turned 19, he was the greatest athlete in the kingdom. He begged his father to let him compete in the Grand Athenian Games, a massive festival of sport hosted by the powerful mainland kingdom of Athens, ruled by the aging King Evan. Marcus, swelling with pride, agreed. He sent his son with a fleet of ships, laden with gifts, to show the world the glory of modern Crete. Andrew's arrival in Athens was a triumph. He was a sensation. He won the 100-yard dash. He won the discus throw. He won the javelin. He was a prodigy in the wrestling ring, defeating every Athenian champion. The Athenian crowds, who had at first cheered this charming prince, grew sullen and quiet. He was too perfect. He was not just winning, he was dominating, a living symbol of Crete's superiority. King Evan, a proud and insecure man, watched from his high seat, his heart filling with a dark, bitter jealousy. He saw in Andrew's effortless victories the shadow of King Marcus's own arrogant ambition. This boy was a threat. He could not be allowed to return to Crete covered in such singular glory. It would make Athens look weak. On the final day of the games, after Andrew had collected yet another victor's wreath, King Evan summoned him. He smiled, his eyes cold. "Prince Andrew," the king said, his voice booming for the crowd, "you have honored us with your strength. But there is one final challenge, one great honor that Athens reserves for only the bravest. Not a game, but a hero's duty." He spoke of a creature terrorizing the farmlands of Marathon. A wild, ferocious bull that had killed travelers and soldiers alike. It was, though King Evan did not know it, the very same white bull of Poseidon, the father of the Minotaur, now old, wild and savage, abandoned by Marcus and left to roam the world as a plague. "Tame this beast, noble prince," King Evan declared, "and you will be declared the eternal hero of Athens." Andrew, young, brave, and hungry for one last victory, eagerly accepted. King Marcus's son would not back down from a challenge. It was a trap. King Evan sent a hunting party with the prince, but he gave his own captain a secret order: do not let him succeed. He must not leave Athens alive. The hunt was chaotic. The great white bull, insane with rage, charged from the brush. Andrew, true to his blood, stood his ground, his spear ready. But when he looked for support, the Athenian hunters had vanished, accidentally separating from him in the woods. He was alone. He fought with all the skill he possessed, but the divine beast was a force of nature. The prince, the golden heir of Crete, was gored and trampled into the dust of Marathon. King Evan sent a ship to Crete, bearing Andrew's broken body and a message of profound sorrow. He wrote of a tragic hunting accident, of the prince's heroic, foolish bravery. King Marcus stood on his cliffs, the same cliffs where he had once summoned the bull, and watched the funeral ship arrive. When he saw his son's body, the king did not weep. The cold, calculating fury he had felt years ago returned, amplified 1,000 times. He knew. He knew in his bones this was no accident. This was the mainland's jealousy. This was King Evan's betrayal. The curse of Poseidon, it seemed, was not finished with him. He takes my first son's humanity, Marcus whispered to the waves, and now he takes my second son's life. His vengeance was swift and absolute. The Cretan war fleet, the most powerful in the world, descended upon Athens. They did not attack the city. They simply blockaded its port. They cut off all food, all trade, all supplies. Athens, a city that lived on its harbor, began to starve. Weeks turned into months. A plague, born of starvation and filth, ravaged the city. King Evan, watching his people die, finally understood the nature of the man he had wronged. He sent a message of unconditional surrender. King Marcus arrived not in a warrior's chariot, but on his black flagship, his face carved from ice. He met the skeletal King Evan on the shore. "You have destroyed us, Marcus," Evan pleaded. "Take our gold. Take our ships. Show us mercy." Mercy! Marcus's voice was quiet, and all the more terrifying for it. "You took my son, my heir, my light. You blame a bull for his death. Very well. You will honor the bull. My kingdom has a dark hunger, Evan. A hunger you have now agreed to feed." He delivered his terms. It was not gold. It was not land. It was a price paid in blood, to honor the beast that killed Andrew, and to feed the beast born of the bull. "Every 9 years, Marcus decreed, as a debt for the life of my son, your city will pay a tribute. You will select 7 of your finest young men, and 7 of your finest young women. Not the sick, not the criminal, but the strongest, the brightest, the most beautiful. Your best. You will send them to me to Crete, where they will pay for your treachery." "As slaves?" Evan asked, his voice trembling. "No," King Marcus said, turning to leave. "As sacrifices. You murdered my son. In return, you will feed my other." And so the dreadful pact was sealed. The following spring, a ship with black sails arrived at Crete. 14 terrified Athenian youths were marched through the streets of Knossos, past the silent, watching crowds. They were taken to the dark opening in the ground, the great stone door of the Labyrinth. The door was rolled open, revealing a blackness that seemed to pull them in. The youths were forced inside. The stone door was rolled shut. And for the first time in years, the ground of Crete trembled as a triumphant, hungry bellow echoed up from the darkness below. The Minotaur had received its first offering. The kingdom of Crete settled into a grim new reality. The first tribute from Athens had vanished into the labyrinth, and the monster in the dark had been fed. The whispers of the beast in the palace dungeons were replaced by a new, more terrible silence. The silence of the earth itself, which seemed to have swallowed 14 young souls whole. King Marcus had buried his shame, and he had exacted his revenge. His power was absolute. But a single, nagging thread of fear remained. One man knew the truth. One man knew the full, sordid story of the queen's curse, the hollow heifer, and the monster's unholy conception. One man had not just built the prison, but had designed it. One man knew its secret, that it had no secret, no single path, no solution. But most importantly, King Marcus knew that a mind that could build such a maze was the only mind on earth that could one day figure out how to defeat it. David Dalian, the master architect, had become the most dangerous man in Crete. Marcus could not simply execute him. Dalian was a national hero. His genius was responsible for Crete's aqueducts, its harbors, its very prosperity. To kill him would be to admit that there was a secret worth killing for. So, the king chose a more subtle, and in many ways, more cruel solution. He summoned the architect to the throne room, which was filled with guards. Dalian entered, wary, but King Marcus was smiling. "David Dalian," the king boomed, his voice full of false warmth. "Your work has saved this kingdom. Your loyalty is unquestioned. Your genius, however, it is a treasure that must be protected. You are too valuable to the state to be allowed to wander freely. We must ensure your safety, and ensure that your mind works only for Crete." He was not arrested, he was sequestered. Dalian, along with his only son, a bright, restless boy named Isaac, were escorted to a new home. It was a magnificent tower, built on the highest sea cliff of the island. It was furnished with the finest silks, fed by the royal kitchens, and stocked with a library of scrolls. It was a gilded cage. The doors were barred from the outside, and a dozen armed guards patrolled its base day and night. From their balcony, they had the most beautiful view in the world, the endless, shimmering blue of the sea. And if they looked straight down, they could just make out the dark, gaping stone entrance of the labyrinth, a constant, silent reminder of the architect's complicity and the king's power. Years began to pass. David Dalian watched his son, Isaac, grow from a curious boy into a bitter, restless young man. Isaac would spend his days pacing the circular rooms of the tower, his heart aching for a world he could see but never touch. He'd watch the merchant ships sail in and out of the harbor, and see the fishing boats become tiny specks on the horizon. His father, the genius, had given him a life of perfect comfort and zero freedom. The dread of the kingdom renewed itself on a 9-year cycle. Dalian and Isaac watched from their tower as the second black-sailed ship arrived from Athens. They watched as another 14 terrified youths were marched to the stone door and consumed by the darkness. Isaac wept in rage, but Dalian was consumed by a different emotion, guilt. He had built the cage for the monster, and in doing so, had built one for himself and his son. He had solved the king's problem, but he had doomed his own child to a life of imprisonment. That night, watching Isaac stare blankly at the moon, David Dalian made a decision. His mind, the very thing King Marcus sought to imprison, would be the key to their escape. "The king is a fool," Dalian whispered to his son, who barely turned. "He's a tyrant," Isaac muttered. "No, a fool," Dalian insisted, a new spark in his eyes. "He has built his fortress of stone and his prison of water. He controls the land, and with his fleet he controls the sea. But he has forgotten the third path, my son. He does not control the air." Isaac looked at his father, confused. Dalian pointed to a gull that had landed on their balcony, searching for scraps. "That," he said. "That is our way out." The obsession took hold. David Dalian, the greatest engineer of his age, began his final and most impossible project. He and Isaac began collecting. Every feather a bird shed on their balcony was saved. They ate the birds their guards brought for dinner, carefully, meticulously, saving every stiff quill from the wings and tail. They unraveled the threads from their own blankets and expensive tapestries, reweaving them into strong, light cord. And from the candles they were given each night, they saved every drop of hardened beeswax. 4 months, their work was secret. They hid the growing pile of feathers and the wax bricks under a loose floor stone. Isaac, once listless, was now energized, a conspirator in the greatest jailbreak ever conceived. Finally, the day came. Dalian laid out his materials. He began to build. He was not a magician, he was an architect. He built 4 great wing frames from the lightest, strongest woods of their furniture, bound with the sinew and thread. He began to layer the feathers, starting with the largest, overlapping them like the scales of a fish. He melted the beeswax and, with painstaking precision, he glued each feather to the frame and to the one before it. He fashioned 2 harnesses from the leather of their sandals and the belts of their robes. After a year of secret, obsessive work, they were finished. 2 pairs of massive, fragile, beautiful wings. They were instruments of pure, desperate genius. They waited for a night with a strong, steady wind blowing from the island toward the mainland. Dalian helped strap the first pair of wings onto his son. Isaac, trembling with anticipation, flapped them awkwardly. He was almost giddy with the prospect of freedom. "Listen to me, Isaac," David Dalian said, his voice firm, grabbing his son by the shoulders. He was not a god, he was an engineer. He knew the terrible fragility of his own creation. He knew the tolerances. "This is not a toy," he said, his eyes boring into his son's. "These wings are held by wax and thread. They will work, but only if you respect the physics. We must fly the middle path. Do you understand me? The middle path." "Yes, yes, the middle path," Isaac said, his eyes already on the horizon. "No, listen." Dalian shook him. "Your excitement will be your enemy. If you fly too low, the mist and the spray from the sea will soak the feathers. They will become heavy, waterlogged, and they will drag you down into the ocean to drown. You must stay above the spray." He pointed up, toward the brilliant, cold moon. "But if you fly too high, if you get arrogant and fly for the sun, the air is warmer up there. The heat of the sun, even miles away, will melt the wax. The feathers will loosen and scatter, and you will fall like a stone. The only way we survive is to fly in the middle. Not too high, not too low. Follow my exact path. Promise me, Isaac. Follow me." "I promise, father," Isaac said, his voice vibrating. "Anything. Let's just go." David Dalian strapped on his own wings. He took a deep breath, the air tasting of salt and freedom. He looked at his son, his heart a painful mix of terror and pride. They climbed onto the stone railing of the balcony. Far below, the guards patrolled the base of the tower, oblivious, their torches tiny pinpricks in the dark. Across the sea, the distant lights of other islands beckoned. "Do not look down," Daedalian commanded. "Look at the horizon. Now, son. For freedom." David Dalian, the master inventor, and his son Isaac, the prisoner of the tower, pushed off from the cliff. They fell for a sickening second, and then the wind caught the great feathered wings. The harnesses strained, the wax held, and they were not falling. They were flying. They were two great birds soaring into the darkness, leaving the island of the monster, and the Mad King far behind. Flight. It was a sensation that no human had ever known. It was not like dreaming. It was real. The wind did not just touch their faces, it roared past their ears, a symphony of freedom. The sea, which had been their prison wall, was now a vast, moonlit map spread out 1,000 feet below. David Dalian was an engineer. He was methodical. He found a rhythm, a steady, powerful flap of his great wings, maintaining a safe altitude. He kept his eyes on the dark line of the horizon, calculating the wind, feeling the strain on the wax and thread. His flight was a matter of survival, a desperate, steady marathon toward the mainland. His son, Isaac, was another matter entirely. Isaac, who had spent his entire conscious life within the stone walls of a tower, was not just free. He was unbound. He was a creature of the air. He tasted the high, cold clouds. He laughed, a wild, joyous shout that was stolen by the wind. He was not just escaping, he was living for the first time. "Look at me, father," he yelled, performing a sharp, banking turn that sent him diving toward the water. "Isaac! No! The middle path!" David Dalian screamed, his voice thin with terror. "The spray! Stay above the spray!" Isaac, with a careless grace of youth, pulled up at the last second, his feet skimming the whitecaps. He felt the cold mist on his shins and laughed even harder. He was a god. He was a gull. He was more than his plodding, fearful father. He climbed, soaring upward, high above David's steady path. "Stay with me, son," David called, his heart hammering with a new dread, one even colder than his fear of King Marcus. "We are not gods. We are men, held up by wax. But we are flying, father." Isaac yelled back. "What's the point of freedom if you don't use it? What's the point of wings if you don't soar?" Behind them, the island of Crete was now just a dark smudge, a bad memory. Ahead of them, the blackness of the night sky was beginning to fade. A pale, purple-gray light appeared on the edge of the world. The dawn was coming. As the first rays of the sun broke the horizon, they illuminated the sky in strokes of violent orange and pink. It was the most beautiful thing Isaac had ever seen. He was no longer just flying, he was ascending into heaven. He was a creature of light and air. His father, a dark speck far below him, seemed so small, so timid, so rooted to the earth he had just left. "I can touch it," Isaac yelled, though there was no one to hear. "I can touch the sun." He began to climb. He beat his wings with all the strength of his young, imprisoned life, driven by a fatal, ecstatic hubris. He was flying higher than any eagle. He was leaving the world of men, of prisons and monsters, behind. The air grew thinner, cleaner, and it grew warmer. "Isaac! No! The sun! Come down!" David Dalian's voice was a distant, meaningless cry. Isaac was lost in his own glory. He felt the sun's warmth on his face, then on his shoulders. It felt wonderful, like a blessing, a divine welcome. Then, the warmth became heat. He felt the first pinprick of hot wax on his shoulder. He flinched, confused. A moment later, a single, small feather drifted lazily past his face. He frowned, not yet understanding. He flapped his wings again, but one of them felt loose. The heat was no longer a blessing, it was an oven. The air, far from the cooling sea, offered no relief. The sun, his beautiful destination, was now a merciless, white eye. The beeswax, the fragile glue that held his freedom together, was failing. He smelled it first, the sweet, sickening scent of melting honey and wax. He looked at his arms. The beautiful, intricate layers of feathers were loosening, the wax turning from a solid bond to a running liquid. A dozen feathers detached and scattered in the wind. Panic, cold and absolute, replaced his joy. "Father!" he screamed, his voice cracking. He tried to flap, to beat his wings and regain control. But the motion only accelerated the disaster. The wings were no longer solid planes. They were disintegrating. Entire clumps of feathers, matted with liquid wax, peeled off the wooden frames and fluttered uselessly into the abyss. "Father, help me!" He was no longer flying. He was flapping two bare, skeletal frames, like a bird picked clean. The lift was gone. For one sickening, weightless moment, he stalled in the air. And then he began to fall. David Dalian, far below, could only watch in mute, screaming horror. He saw his son, his only child, tumbling end over end, a tiny flailing shape against the vast, empty blue of the morning sky. He was shedding a cloud of white feathers, a snowfall in reverse, marking the path of his descent. "Isaac!" The father tried to fly up, to catch him, but he knew it was hopeless. He was too heavy, his son was falling too fast. He could only circle, a helpless, grieving spectator, as his son plummeted from the heavens. Isaac fell for an eternity. He saw the world spin, the blue sky, the gold sun, the blue sea. He saw the face of his father, a speck of terror, circling below. He closed his eyes and hit the water. The impact was absolute. A plume of white spray erupted from the ocean surface, and then he was gone. The sea, which he had so arrogantly skimmed minutes before, had swallowed him whole. David Dalian circled the spot, his wings now feeling like an unbearable weight. His throat was raw from screaming his son's name. But there was no answer. There was nothing. Nothing but the endless, glittering water, and the thousands of white feathers that now floated on its surface, the only tombstone for the boy who had flown too high. The architect, the genius, the man who had built a prison for a monster and wings for a man, was now just a father. A father who had lost his son to the very freedom he had given him. He flew for hours, circling the patch of ocean, until the sun was high and brutal in the sky. He could not bring himself to leave. But the body was gone, dragged down into the depths. His invention was a curse. His genius was a poison. Finally, his strength failing, his heart shattered into a million pieces, David Dalian turned his back on the sea that had claimed his son. He flew on, not toward any destination, in particular, but just away. Away from Crete, away from Marcus, away from the Labyrinth, away from the ghost of his child. He landed, days later, on the distant shore of Sicily. His legs buckled as he hit the sand. He stood on the beach, a broken old man. With a roar of pure, undiluted grief, he tore the magnificent wings from his own back. He smashed the wooden frames against the rocks. He threw the feathers into the wind and watched them scatter. He cursed his hands, he cursed his mind, and he cursed the gods who had given him the genius to fly, but not the power to save his only son. The secret of the labyrinth was now truly, permanently safe. King Marcus need not have worried. The only man who knew its design was now in self-imposed exile, a broken man who would never invent, never build, and never fly again, his greatest creation having led to his greatest failure. While David Dalian, the broken architect, found his exile in Sicily, the gears of the gods and the calendars of men continued to turn. The sea that had swallowed Isaac was now known to sailors as the Icarian Sea, a place of ill omen, but the kingdom of Crete remained untouched. King Marcus grew older, his rule hardening from mere tyranny into an ironclad legend. His wife, Queen Patricia, had long since passed, a ghost of grief and madness who was rarely spoken of. The labyrinth, the dark scar on the earth, remained, and the monster within it, the Minotaur, had become the dark god of the island. 9 more years had passed. Across the sea, in the city of Athens, a dreadful pallor had fallen. It was time for the third tribute. It was time for the reaping. The city was in mourning, for everyone knew that the lots were to be drawn. 14 families were about to be destroyed. King Evan, now a frail white-haired man, ruled his city not with power, but with a shared, hopeless grief. He had lost his honor to King Marcus's fleet, and his people's children to Marcus's monster. He was a king of ashes. On the very day the lots were to be drawn, a stranger arrived in Athens. He was a young man, but he walked with the confidence of a lion. He was tall, with a powerful athletic build, and he carried a magnificent, bronze-hilted sword at his side. He had come from the south, from the countryside, and his journey had been one of heroes. This young man's name was Theo. Theo was the secret son of King Evan, born of a brief union before the king had returned to Athens to rule. Evan, fearing for his son's safety, had left him to be raised in the country by his mother. But before leaving, he had placed his own royal sword and a pair of his sandals under a massive, unmovable boulder. "When our son is strong enough to lift this stone," he told Theo's mother, "send him to me. He will be my heir." Theo, upon his 18th birthday, had not just lifted the stone, he had thrown it aside. He claimed his father's sword, put on his father's sandals, and walked the long, dangerous road to Athens to claim his birthright. He arrived at a city in tears. He pushed through the weeping crowds to the royal palace and found his father, King Evan, not on a throne, but on a stone balcony, staring blankly at the sea, his face a mask of despair. "Father," Theo said, his voice quiet but clear. King Evan turned, annoyed by the interruption. He saw a stranger and frowned. "This is a day of mourning, young man. State your business and leave." Theo did not speak. He simply drew the great sword and laid it at the king's feet, next to the worn leather sandals he had carried on his back. The king's eyes widened. He stared at the sword, his hand trembling as he reached down to touch the familiar hilt. He looked from the sword to the young man's face, seeing his own eyes, his own features, return to him in youthful strength. It cannot be," he whispered. "Theo, my son." "I am here, father," Theo said. For the first time in nearly 2 decades, a cry of pure joy echoed through the Athenian palace. The king embraced his son, his lost heir, his redemption. The city, for a moment, forgot its sorrow, as word spread that a prince had returned. The joy lasted less than an hour. "But why does the city weep?" Theo asked, as the celebrations in the hall died down, replaced by the grim ringing of a bell. "Why are the houses draped in black?" The king's newfound joy evaporated. He turned away. It was a courtier who answered, his voice low and bitter. "The reaping, my prince. It is the day we pay the blood price. It is the day we choose the 14. Theo's brow furrowed. 14? What price? What are you talking about? And so, his father, his face ashen with shame, told him everything. He told him of the death of Andrew King, Marcus's son. He told him of the war, the blockade, the starvation. And he told him of the tribute. Every 9 years, 7 of Athens' finest young men and 7 of its finest young women, chosen by lot, to be sent to Crete and fed to the monster in the Labyrinth. Theo listened, his expression turning from confusion to disbelief, and then to a cold, burning rage. "You let this happen," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. He looked at his father. "You let this tyrant take your children? You feed them to a beast. We had no choice." King Evan cried, his new paternal pride crumbling back into old shame. "His fleet is too strong. He starved us. He would do it again. It is the price for our city's survival." "That is not survival, father. That is cowardice," Theo said, his voice like steel. He picked up the sword. "This tribute ends today." "Theo, no," the king pleaded, grabbing his arm. "You don't understand. This is King Marcus. This is the Minotaur. It's a monster, a god's curse. You are a man." "I am the Prince of Athens," Theo said, shrugging off his father's hand. "And the Prince of Athens does not send his people to die in his place. Stop the lottery. I will be one of the 7. I am going to Crete. As a sacrifice?" The king wept, falling to his knees. "I have just found you, only to lose you?" "No," Theo said, his eyes fixed on the sea toward Crete. "Not as a sacrifice. As a slayer. I will find this beast in its little maze. And I will kill it." A frantic argument erupted. The king forbade it. He begged. He commanded. But Theo's will was as strong as the stone he had lifted. He was going. Seeing he could not stop his son, King Evan's mind, desperate and broken, seized on one last, tiny fragment of hope. He took Theo down to the harbor, where the dreadful tribute ship was being prepared. Its sails were vast and black, the color of mourning. "This is the ship of death," King Evan whispered, touching the black canvas. "For 18 years, it has only flown this color. It is the sign of our submission. But..." He commanded a sailor to bring him a second, furled sail. It was rolled open, revealing a canvas of brilliant, stark white. "My son," the king said, his voice thick with tears. "I will not be able to stop you. But I make this one demand of you. Take this white sail. If you do what you say, if you kill the beast and you are coming home alive, I beg you, Theo, take down the black sail and raise this white one." He clutched his son's shoulders, his eyes desperate. "I will stand on these cliffs every day, from the moment you are due to return. I will watch the horizon. Do not make me guess. The black sail will mean you have failed, and I will join you in death. But the white sail will tell me my son is alive. It will be the signal that Athens is free." Theo looked at his father, his own arrogant confidence softened for a moment by the old man's pain. He clasped his arm. "I promise, father. When you see this ship again, it will be flying this white sail. The days of mourning are over." The lots were drawn for the 13 other youths. Their families wept. They were marched to the ship, their faces pale, their steps shuffling. They looked like the dead already. But one of them walked with his head held high. Prince Theo, his father's sword hidden in his tunic, stepped onto the black-sailed ship. He was not a victim. He was a hero. The ship's lines were cast off. As the city of Athens wailed on the docks, the tribute ship, with its cargo of 14 doomed youths and one determined prince, set its course for Crete, and for the monster waiting in the dark. The journey to Crete was a voyage of dreadful silence. The 13 other tributes, chosen by the cruelty of the lot, huddled on the deck, their faces gray with a terror that had already consumed them. They were ghosts long before they reached the land of the dead. Only Prince Theo seemed alive. He stood at the prow, his back to the others, his eyes fixed on the horizon. He did not comfort them. He did not offer them false hope. He spent the voyage in a cold, meditative focus, feeling the edge of his hidden sword, studying the roll of the waves, and memorizing the position of the stars. He was not a sacrifice. He was a surgeon, and he was sailing toward a sickness he intended to cut out of the world. When the massive cliffs of Crete appeared, a collective, hopeless wail rose from the 13. Theo merely gripped the hilt of his sword. The harbor of Knossos was unlike anything they had ever seen. It was a forest of masts, a fortress of stone, a city built on wealth and power. It made Athens look like a quiet village. They were dragged from the ship, not by soldiers, but by grim-faced priests in dark robes. The Athenians were put in chains and paraded through the wide, paved streets of the capital. The citizens of Knossos lined the roads. Their reaction was not one of simple bloodlust. Some, the old veterans of the war, spat at the youths and yelled, "For Prince Andrew, an eye for an eye." But others, mostly mothers who had sons of their own, watched with a quiet, profound pity. They threw no flowers, but they threw no stones. They simply watched the grim procession, crossed their arms, and went back inside, their faces troubled. Theo met all their gazes. He walked with his head high, his chains rattling. He was not ashamed. He was not afraid. He was studying them, just as they were studying him. His defiance was so profound it was almost an insult. They were brought at last to the grand palace, into the hall of the double axe. It was a vast, open-air room, its walls painted with vibrant, leaping bulls. At the far end, on a throne of polished cedar, sat King Marcus. He was an old man now, but his age had only sharpened his features. He looked like a bird of prey, his eyes missing nothing, his grip on his authority absolute. At the steps of his throne stood his 2 daughters. The younger, Chloe, was pale and looked away, unable to watch the procession. But the elder, Princess Ariana, watched with a keen, intelligent, and troubled gaze. She had seen this tribute twice before, and it was always the same, weeping, broken children. King Marcus raised his hand, and the hall fell silent. "The law is the law," he said, his voice dry and cold, echoing in the huge room. "Athens took the life of my son, the heir of Crete. For this, Athens pays. The gods demand balance. Your city's debt is paid with your lives, so that my kingdom may live in peace. The beast in the labyrinth must be fed." The 13 youths collapsed, weeping and begging for mercy. All except one. Theo stepped forward, the chains on his wrists pulling taut. "The gods do not demand this. You do." The hall gasped. The guards snapped their spears to attention. King Marcus leaned forward, an eyebrow raised, a flicker of cold amusement in his eyes. "The sacrifices are not usually so vocal. You have a name, Athenian." "I am Theo, son of King Evan, your servant," Theo said, his voice laced with contempt. "And I am the last tribute your cowardice will ever claim. I am here to end this." Another gasp. Princess Ariana's eyes went wide. She had never in her entire life heard anyone speak to her father that way. King Marcus did not rage. He laughed. It was a dry, rasping sound, like stones scraping together. "A lion. King Evan has sent a lion from his city of sheep. You are brave, boy. I will give you that. It is the same bravery that got my son, Andrew, killed. You think you can slay the beast?" "I know I can," Theo said. "Then you are a fool," Marcus replied, his amusement fading. "The labyrinth is not a cage you can fight your way out of. It is a puzzle that unwraps the mind. It is a darkness that swallows hope. Your strength will not help you. Your little sword," he gestured, and a guard ripped Theo's tunic, revealing the hidden blade, "will not help you. You will die in that darkness, just like all the others. But you will die last. I will have the beast save you for the end. I want it to enjoy your arrogance." He waved his hand. "Take them to the cells. At dawn, they will be given to the earth." Theo, his sword now gone, was slammed by the guards and dragged out with the others. But as he was pulled from the hall, His eyes met those of Princess Ariana. He did not see pity in her gaze. He saw conflict. He saw a flicker of admiration. And she saw in him the first man who had ever stood before her father and not been afraid. The tributes were thrown into a dark, damp holding cell deep in the foundations of the palace. The 13 huddled together in a corner, a single, weeping mass of despair. Theo, however, went to work. He tested the stones in the wall. He examined the lock on the heavy wooden door. He paced the cell, his mind racing, trying to formulate a plan. Night fell. The sounds of the palace faded. There was only the sound of muffled crying and the drip of water in the darkness. Suddenly, Theo heard a faint scraping sound outside the cell door. The heavy bar was being lifted. He flattened himself against the wall, his hands clenched into fists, ready to fight. The door creaked open. A single figure, wrapped in a dark cloak, slipped inside, carrying a small, hooded lantern. The other tributes didn't even look up. "Who are you?" Theo whispered, his voice a low growl. The figure pulled back the hood. It was the princess, Ariana. Her face was pale in the lantern light, but her eyes were resolute. Theo's eyes narrowed. "Have you come to mock us before we die? To see the brave lion in his cage?" "Be quiet," she whispered, her voice trembling but firm. "I have come to help you." "Help me?" Theo scoffed. "You are his daughter. This is a trick." "It is not a trick," she said, stepping closer. I saw you today. You are the first person to ever speak the truth in that hall. My father, he is trapped by the past. He is bound to the ghost of my brother. This entire kingdom is sick with this secret. And you are the only one who has ever challenged it. I cannot let you die. I don't need your pity, princess. I need a weapon. I cannot give you your sword," she said. "The beast is not just a beast. They say it is unnatural. A sword may not be enough. But even if you kill it, you will die. That is the point. The labyrinth is a one-way door. No one who has ever entered has ever come out. Not even the man who built it. Then why are you here?" Theo said, his patience gone. "Because I have what he left behind," Ariana said. She reached into her cloak and pulled out 2 things. The first was a heavy bronze sword, a true Cretan weapon, far superior to his Athenian blade. The second was simple, almost comical, a perfect, tightly wound ball of golden string. Theo looked at the string, confused. "You are brave," she said, "but you are not clever. The labyrinth is a maze. It is not about fighting the walls, it is about remembering them. My father is a tyrant, but he is not stupid. The monster is only half the prison. The maze is the other half." She pressed the ball of string into his hand. "Take this. Tie one end to the great door as you enter. And as you walk, let it unspool behind you. Do not let it go. When you are done, if you kill the beast, it will be your only path back to the light. It is the one secret my father does not know." Theo stared at the string, and then at her face. He saw no deception. He saw a desperate, dangerous sincerity. "Why? Why betray your father? Your kingdom?" Ariana looked down. "Because I do not want to be the daughter of a monster keeper. Because I want my kingdom to be free of this curse. And because I want you to live." She looked up, her eyes meeting his. "There is a price. You must take me with you. When you escape, you cannot leave me here. My father will know what I have done. He will kill me. You must take me back to Athens." Theo looked at the sword, then at the string. He looked at the face of the princess, a traitor to her own blood, all for a man she had just met. He nodded. "Kill the beast. Escape the maze. And take you to Athens. It's a deal." Dawn broke over Crete, cold and gray. The 14 Athenian tributes were marched from their dungeon cell, their hands bound. The 13 were a picture of abject terror, some shaking so violently they could barely walk, others in a silent, catatonic state of shock. Prince Theo was a stark contrast. His face was a mask of cold fury and concentration. His hands were bound in front of him, and he had used the position to hide the ball of golden string in his palm. The heavy Cretan sword was strapped tightly to his back, hidden beneath his dark tunic. From a high window in the palace, Princess Ariana watched. She was dressed in white, a stark figure against the dark stone. She saw Theo in the crowd, and for a heart-stopping second, their eyes met across the plaza. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. She pressed her hand to her heart, a silent, terrified prayer. The procession arrived at the entrance to the labyrinth. It was not a grand, columned building, but a gaping wound in the earth, a massive, downward sloping ramp that led to a single colossal stone door. The air around it was still and cold. King Marcus was there, seated on a portable throne, flanked by his royal guards. He looked at the 14 youths with an expression of grim satisfaction. "The time has come," he announced, his voice carrying in the silent morning. "The debt, which your fathers incurred in their arrogance, must be paid. Your lives will balance the scales for the life of my son. May the gods of the earth accept your offering." At his signal, a dozen soldiers put their shoulders to the great stone door. With a deafening, grinding groan that sounded like the earth itself in pain, the door began to roll aside. A wave of refrigerated, foul air washed up the ramp. It was a smell of absolute decay, of damp stone, of ancient, dried blood, and an overwhelming, musky, animal odor that made the soldiers recoil. The 13 tributes screamed. They pulled back, falling to their knees, begging, but the guards showed no mercy. They were forced up, prodded with the blunt ends of spears, and herded down the ramp. One by one, their cries were swallowed by the rectangular, absolute darkness of the entrance. Theo was the last. As he reached the threshold, a guard shoved him forward. Theo stumbled, using the moment to duck down, just inside the doorway, out of sight of the guards above. With practiced speed, he found the heavy bronze mooring hook that Ariana had told him was just inside the frame. He looped the end of the golden string around it, pulled the knot tight, and concealed the ball in his left hand. "Move!" a guard yelled from above. Theo stood up, drew the great Cretan sword from his back, and took his first step into the labyrinth. The sound of the stone door rolling shut behind him was the most final sound he had ever heard. It was not just a door, it was the sound of the world ending. The last sliver of gray light vanished, and he was plunged into a darkness so profound, so heavy, it felt like being buried in black velvet. For a moment, there was only the sound of his own heart and the shrieks of the other tributes, echoing horribly in the confined space. "A light! By the gods, a light!" one of them shrieked. "I can't breathe! I can't see! We're going to die! We're going to die in the dark! Stay together!" Theo commanded, his voice a powerful roar. "Everyone, find a wall and follow me. We stay as one." But it was too late. Panic was a contagion, and it had already consumed them. The darkness was not just an absence of light, it was a disorienting force. The acoustics of the L. The bellow was not a sound. It was a physical force, a wave of pressure that shook the bones in Theo's chest and sent dust showering from the unseen ceiling. The two red, hateful eyes in the darkness did not blink. They were fixated. And then they charged. It was not the sound of a man running. It was the thunder of hooves on stone, a terrifying, rhythmic thud-thud-thud that closed the distance in an instant. It sounded like a runaway chariot, like an earthquake given legs. Theo did not try to stand his ground. He was a warrior, not a fool. He held the Cretan sword high and dived to his left, rolling across the uneven, bone-strewn floor. He crashed hard against a slick stone wall, the ball of string held tight in his left hand, the sword in his right. He was a fraction of a second too slow. The creature's shoulder, a wall of muscle and coarse fur, clipped him as it passed. The impact was strong enough to spin him around and slam his head against the stone. For a moment, his vision flared with white-hot stars. Boom! The Minotaur, charging at the spot where Theo had been, smashed headfirst into the solid wall of the labyrinth. The entire corridor shuddered. A large crack appeared in the stone. The creature let out a grunt of frustration, not pain, and backed away, shaking its massive head. Theo scrambled to his feet, his ears ringing. The monster was a dark shape in the greater darkness, a shadow that moved. He could see the silhouette of its massive, man-like torso, and the impossible, heavy shape of the bull's head. It turned, and the two red eyes, glowing with their own internal, hateful light, found him again. It didn't charge. It stalked. It knew he was trapped. It owned this darkness. Theo heard its breathing, a deep, wet, rasping sound, like a giant bellows. It was circling him, its hooves scraping on the stone. Theo held the sword in a two-handed grip, but his left hand was still encumbered by the vital ball of string. He was a one-handed fighter against a demon. "Come on then," Theo hissed, trying to get his breathing under control. "Come and get me." The beast lunged. It was faster than anything that large had a right to be. It didn't use its horns. It swung a fist. A colossal, human-like fist that Theo barely saw in time. He tried to parry with the sword, but the force of the blow was sickening. The flat of the blade connected with the creature's arm, and the resulting shock nearly tore the sword from his hand. Theo was thrown backward, tumbling into a deep pile of something soft and rotten. It was the remains of the monster's bedding, a foul nest of straw, rotted cloth, and splintered bones. The monster was on him in an instant. It stood over him, a mountain of shadow, and he could finally see it clearly in the faint red glow of its own eyes. It was a grotesque fusion. The body of a giant, knotted with muscle, but the head of a bull, with thick, curved horns and a wet, black snout. It snorted, and a hot, foul spray of breath washed over Theo's face. It smelled of spoiled meat and ammonia. It lowered its head. The polished, sharp points of its horns were aimed directly at Theo's chest. This was it. With a desperate primal yell, Theo released his grip on the string, letting the ball fall to the ground. He gripped the sword with both hands and, as the monster lunged down for the kill, Theo thrust upward with all the strength of his body. He wasn't aiming for the thick-skulled head. He wasn't aiming for the chest. He aimed for the soft, exposed area under the arm, where the massive shoulder met the torso. The heavy, leaf-shaped Cretan blade sank in deep. The Minotaur shrieked. It was a sound that was neither human nor bull. It was a deafening, agonizing, metallic scream that pierced Theo's ears and his very soul. The monster reared back, throwing Theo from the nest. It thrashed wildly, slamming against the walls, its own roars of pain echoing in a deafening cacophony. Theo scrambled in the dark, his hands searching for the string. He found it. But when he looked back, he saw the monster, in its blind agony, had ripped the sword from its own shoulder. It now held the Cretan blade in its own massive, human-like hand. Theo's blood ran cold. It had not just been a beast. It was a creature. It knew what a weapon was. The Minotaur, bleeding heavily from its side, its red eyes now burning with a focused, intelligent rage, advanced. It was wounded, and it was now armed. Theo backed away, out of the lair, into the twisting corridors, letting the string play out. He was unarmed. This was no longer a hunt. It was a rout. He ran, his footsteps echoing in the maze. He heard the heavy, limping thud stomp of the beast behind him. It was coming. He had to think. He couldn't fight it. He couldn't outrun it. He had to trap it. He rounded a sharp corner. He had an idea. A terrible, desperate gamble. He stopped. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the small piece of flint and steel he carried on his belt. He struck it. A tiny, fleeting spark. He saw the corridor ahead. It was narrow. He heard the beast roaring, getting closer. He took the precious golden string and, in a flurry of motion, looped it around a sharp piece of jutting rock. He ran it across the narrow corridor, about ankle height, and wrapped it around another stalagmite on the other side. He pulled it taut. A tripwire. A tripwire made of simple thread, meant to stop a 2-ton monster. It was insane. He scrambled back, putting himself 20 feet past the trap. He struck the flint again, a tiny spark. "I'm here, you bastard!" he yelled into the darkness. "Come and finish it." He heard the answering roar. He heard the charge. The heavy, limping, furious run. The Minotaur turned the corner, its eyes burning, the stolen sword raised over its head. It saw the spark and charged at it, blinded by its own rage. It never saw the golden thread. Its front hoof caught the string. The string, a simple line of fiber, did not stop the beast. It didn't need to. It only needed to trip it. The monster, already off balance from its wound, its hooves sliding on the slick, sloping stone floor, stumbled. It let out a grunt of surprise. Its massive, top-heavy body pitched forward. It tried to catch itself, but its momentum was too great. The Minotaur fell. It crashed to the ground with the force of a falling tree, its massive bull's head striking the stone floor with a sickening, wet crack. It was stunned, dazed. It let out a low, confused moan. The sword clattered from its hand. That was all the time Theo needed. He was on it in an instant. He didn't hesitate. He grabbed the fallen Cretan sword. The beast was on its side, trying to push itself up, its legs kicking. Theo put his boot on the creature's thick, matted neck. He raised the sword high. The monster stopped struggling. It looked up at him. For one brief, horrifying moment, the red rage faded from its eyes. In the darkness, Theo saw something else. He saw the pained, confused, and terrified eyes of a child, a prisoner, a curse. He saw the grotesque, tragic, lonely creature that King Marcus and Queen Patricia had spawned and hidden. A faint scream echoed from deep in the labyrinth, one of the last of the Athenian tributes. Theo's resolve hardened. This was not a child. This was an eater of children. He gripped the sword with both hands. "Your curse ends now," he whispered. With a final, desperate yell of his own, he plunged the heavy blade down, deep into the monster's throat, severing the spine. There was a heavy, wet, gurgling sigh. The massive body gave one last, violent shudder, and then was still. The two red eyes, which had burned like coals, faded and went dark. The silence that fell was absolute. It was heavier than the darkness, heavier than the stone. The Minotaur was dead. The silence that followed the monster's death was heavier than the darkness, more absolute than any sound. It was the sound of a curse being broken. Theo stood in the pitch black, his chest heaving, his entire body screaming in protest. The adrenaline that had fueled him through the fight was now draining away, leaving behind a sharp, throbbing pain in his ribs and a deep, burning exhaustion. The monster's blood was thick and hot on his hands and on the sword. He was alive. He had won. But he was not alone. He stood perfectly still, listening. He ignored the pounding of his own blood and the drip of water in the distant corridors. He listened for human sound. And he heard it. Faint, but unmistakable. He heard weeping. "Hello," he called out, his voice hoarse and raw. "It's Theo. I am here. The beast is dead." His voice echoed, rolling down the impossible corridors, distorting and fading. The weeping stopped, replaced by a terrified silence. "I am Athenian," he yelled, "the Prince of Athens. The monster is dead. Follow my voice. We are going home." He fumbled in the dark until his hand found the precious ball of string. He began to wind it, taking his first steps back from the lair. A moment later, a voice, thin and trembling, called back. "Theo, is it truly dead?" "It is dead," he confirmed. "Follow the string. I am winding it back. Come to me." From a side corridor, a shadow moved. A young man, one of the 14, stumbled out, his hands outstretched. He ran into Theo and collapsed, clutching his legs, sobbing. "It's dead. It's dead." "Get up," Theo said, his voice firm but not unkind. "There are others." They ran, the young man stammered. "When we first entered, the darkness, they scattered. I just hid. I heard it. Find them. The screams." "How many are with you?" Theo demanded, shaking him. "Two more. Hiding in a cistern." I think there are two girls, as well, in a passage above us. We heard the fight. We thought you were dead too." "Call to them," Theo commanded. "Tell them it is safe." The young man, galvanized by Theo's presence, yelled into the dark. In a few agonizing minutes, 4 more shapes emerged from the blackness. They were the last. 5 survivors, of the 13 that had entered with him. They were pale, traumatized, and shaking, but they were alive. "What about the others?" a young woman whispered, her eyes wide with a terror that would never leave her. Theo looked into the darkness of the maze, the endless, branching paths. "They are lost," he said, his voice heavy. "The labyrinth took them. We cannot save them. We can only save ourselves." He was their leader now. Wounded, exhausted, but alive. He put the most terrified survivor's hand on his shoulder. "We are leaving. Everyone, hold on to the person in front of you. Do not let go. And do not, whatever you do, let go of the string." And so began the long, slow, agonizing journey back. Theo led them, one hand winding the life-saving golden thread, the other holding the bloody Cretan sword. It was not a simple walk. The labyrinth fought them every step of the way. The sloping floors tried to turn them, the slick walls threatened to make them fall. The false echoes of their own footsteps made the survivors jump and cry out, thinking the beast was behind them. They had to walk past the monster's lair again. One of the women saw the massive, still, dark shape of the Minotaur's body and let out a strangled scream. "Do not look," Theo commanded. "It is dead. It cannot hurt you. Keep walking. Follow the string." It felt like an eternity. They had no idea if it was day or night. They were in a place outside of time. Theo's ribs were a constant, sharp fire. His only focus was the feel of the string in his hand, a single, thin, delicate line of hope in a world of despair. And then, after hours, the string ran out. His hand, winding the ball, hit the bronze hook at the entrance. He had reached the door. It was a solid, unmoving wall of black stone. They were at the exit, but they were still entombed. Theo beat on the door with the hilt of his sword. The sound was dull, heavy, and absorbed by the stone. "Hello. Let us out. Ariana. It is done. We are here." There was no answer. The survivors, who had held onto a fragile thread of hope, began to crumble. "She's left us," one of them wept. "She was lying. King Marcus found out. We're trapped. We're trapped here to die with it. Be silent, Theo roared, his patience breaking. He put his ear to the cold stone, listening. She will come. He waited. 1 second. 10. A minute. Nothing but the sound of his own friend's despair. And then, a sound. A faint scrape. It was on the other side. It was the sound of a heavy wooden bar being lifted from its brackets. Scree. A new sound. A lever, groaning in the stone. The massive door was moving. Not rolling aside, as it had been by the soldiers. It was being pushed, slowly, agonizingly, just a crack. A single, horizontal sliver of brilliant, agonizing light cut through the darkness. It was the most beautiful thing Theo had ever seen. The door opened just enough for a person to squeeze through. And in the opening, her face a mask of white-knuckled terror and desperate hope, was Princess Ariana. She was alone, panting, a large iron lever in her hands. Theo, she whispered, her eyes wide, searching the darkness. He stepped forward, out of the blackness and into the blinding Cretan sun. He was a horrific sight. He was covered in filth and the monster's dark, drying blood. He held the massive, gory sword in his hand. It is dead, he said, his voice a rasp. Ariana dropped the lever and a sob of pure relief escaped her. But she did not run to him. She looked past him, into the darkness. The others! One by one, the 5 survivors stumbled out, like creatures born from the earth. They fell onto the stone ramp, blinking at the sunlight, which was so bright it felt like fire. They kissed the ground, weeping with a joy that was almost as painful as their fear. We have to go, Ariana said, her voice regaining its urgency. She grabbed Theo's arm, her hands staining red. Now, the guards, they make their rounds at mid-morning. They will find the door unbarred. They will find the body. My father will know. He will seal the harbor. He will kill us all. Theo looked at his small, broken band of survivors. He looked at the princess, who had betrayed her entire world for him. He nodded, pushing the pain in his ribs down. The ship. We have to get to the ship. It's still in the harbor, she said, pulling him. The Athenian crew is kept under guard on board. I told the harbor master they were not to be harmed. We can free them, but we cannot walk through the city. We must run. Then we run, Theo said. He turned for one last look at the black, gaping mouth of the labyrinth. He had done the impossible. He had faced the monster and won. He, Ariana, and the 5 traumatized survivors, a small, desperate group of fugitives, began to run down the hidden goat paths and servants' trails, away from the palace and the house of the beast, racing the sun and the king's wrath toward the harbor. The run was a blur of panic and pain. Princess Ariana, a traitor to her crown and a savior to her enemies, led the desperate, broken group. She knew the palace, not as a princess, but as a prisoner, and she knew its hidden ways. She led them down spiraling servant stairs, through hot, steamy laundry tunnels, and out into the narrow, refuse-filled alleys of the lower city. The 5 survivors ran on the last, frantic fumes of adrenaline. They were shadows, barely comprehending their own freedom. Theo was the worst. His wounds, now that the cold of the labyrinth was gone, had begun to throb with a deep, fiery pain. His ribs felt like shattered glass. He was leaning heavily on the young man he had first rescued, his breath coming in ragged gasps. But he held the bloody Cretan sword, and his eyes were fixed, scanning every corner, every rooftop. He was a wounded lion, still dangerous. They burst out of the alleys and onto the sun-drenched stone of the main harbor. For a moment, the world stopped. Merchants, sailors, and city women all froze, staring at the impossible sight. A princess, her white robe stained with grime and blood, a giant wounded warrior who looked more beast than man, and 5 people who looked like ghosts, all running pell-mell for the Athenian dock. The black-sailed tribute ship was there, a dark, grim monument to their suffering. 2 heavy-set Cretan guards stood at the gangplank, idly chatting, their spears resting against the railing. Ariana, get the survivors behind me, Theo growled, straightening up, the pain be damned. This part is mine. No, she whispered, pulling him back. Distraction, not force. Before he could argue, she walked forward, pulling her tattered royal cloak around her, trying to regain an air of authority. The guards snapped to attention, their eyes wide with confusion. Guards! Ariana called, her voice high and strained. A sudden change of plan. The sacrifice has been altered. The king requires these remaining offerings to be taken to the sea shrine for purification. Prepare the ship. One of the guards looked at her, then at Theo, his hand tightening on his spear. Princess, we have no such orders. And, by the gods, what happened to you? And to him. He gestured at Theo, who was now just a few yards behind her, his sword held low. The beast, it broke free. Ariana improvised, her voice rising with convincing panic. It killed the others. These are all that are left. It's rampaging in the labyrinth. The king wants them off the island now before. The guard's face went pale. That was all the distraction Theo needed. He didn't wait for a reply. He surged forward, a single, fluid motion. He reversed the heavy sword and, using the massive, non-lethal pommel, struck the first guard in the temple. The man crumpled without a sound. The second guard tried to raise his spear, but Theo was too fast. He slammed his shoulder into the man's chest, pinning him to the bulkhead, and brought the sword hilt down on his helmet. The guard slumped, unconscious. On the ship! Now! Theo roared. The 5 survivors scrambled up the gangplank. Ariana was right behind them. Theo grabbed a mooring line and turned to the Athenian crew, who were huddled, prisoners, on the main deck. They stared at him, their prince, as if he were an apparition. You're alive, one of them whispered. Get this ship moving. Theo bellowed, throwing off the crew's shackles with a strike from his sword. Cut the lines. Get the sails. We are leaving, or we are dying on this dock. The crew, shocked back to life by the command, sprang into action. They were sailors, and they were free. They worked with a frantic, desperate speed. Men scrambled up the rigging. Others grabbed axes and hacked at the thick, hempen mooring ropes. A high, thin trumpet note sounded from the palace high above. The alarm. They know, Ariana cried, pointing up the hill. They know we're gone. Too late, Theo grunted, pushing the tiller with all his weight. The ship, freed from its ropes, began to drift from the dock. The sails, the captain yelled. The great, black sails, the very symbol of their mourning, unfurled with a whoosh and caught the strong morning wind. The ship lurched, then surged forward, cutting through the blue harbor water. Behind them, the city of Knossos erupted like a kicked hornet's nest. Men were running to the docks, to the great Cretan warships. King Marcus, seen as a tiny, furious figure on the palace ramparts, was ordering his fleet to pursue. But it was too late. The Athenian ship was small, light, and built for speed. The Cretan warships were heavy, powerful, and built for war, but they were not ready. By the time they had their crews assembled and their own sails raised, Theo's ship was a dark speck on the horizon, racing for the open sea. They were safe. 4 hours, no one spoke. The 5 survivors huddled on the deck, wrapped in sailors' cloaks, staring back at the island that would haunt their dreams forever. They were alive, but a part of them had been left behind in that darkness. Ariana, her hands cleaned, her face still pale with shock, tended to Theo's wounds. She wrapped his ribs tightly and cleaned the blood from his arms. He sat on the deck, his back against the mast, the bloody Cretan sword laid across his knees. He was the hero. He was the slayer. And he was exhausted. The voyage home was a quiet, surreal dream. The sea was calm, the wind was perfect. Theo and Ariana spent hours just sitting, watching the waves, the tension of their escape slowly giving way to the reality of their future. He had saved her. She had saved him. He was a prince returning home, and she was a traitor who could never go back. They will call you a hero, Theo, she said quietly, her voice tracing the salt spray. They will call you a traitor, he replied, just as quietly. I know, she said, and she did not sound afraid. But I helped stop a monster. My father, he kept one. He looked at her, at the strength that had defied a king and unbarred a tomb, and he felt a new profound connection. He had fulfilled his vow to kill the beast. He had fulfilled his bargain to save the princess. And in the fog of his exhaustion, in the relief of his survival, and in the new complicated dawn of his feelings for Ariana, he looked up at the mast. He saw the great black sail, full of the wind that was carrying them home. It was the sail of their escape. It was the sail of their freedom. He had forgotten. The white sail, the symbol of hope, the promise he had made to his father, lay folded and forgotten in the ship's hold. The ship, a beacon of victory, was flying a signal of death. And as it sped toward Athens, it was racing to meet an old, grieving king who had been standing on a cliff, watching the horizon, every single day, waiting for a sign. Back in Athens, the city had been holding its breath for weeks. The departure of the black-sailed ship had plunged the capital into a familiar 9-year despair, but this time, it was different. This time, their prince, their new, bold, and powerful hero, Theo, was with them. The city was trapped between 2 impossible feelings, the dread of the labyrinth and the defiant hope of their prince. No one felt this pull more than the old king, Evan. Every day since the ship had been due, King Evan had made a pilgrimage. He would walk from the palace to the highest cliff on the cape, a sheer drop of stone that overlooked the vast, blue sea. He would stand there, his thin, white hair whipped by the salt wind, from the first light of dawn until the sun bled into the horizon. He did not eat. He barely spoke. He just watched. His guards and courtiers would plead with him. "My king, you must rest. You will wear yourself to dust." "I will rest when I see the sail," he would whisper, his eyes, raw and red from the wind, never leaving the empty line of the sea. He promised. A white sail. The people of Athens saw their king's vigil. It became their own. The docks were quiet, the market subdued. The entire city was waiting, their eyes turned south, toward Crete. On a bright, clear morning, a full week after the ship was due, a new sound was heard. It was the cry of a lookout, stationed high on the temple. A sail! A sail from the south! It is the tribute ship! It returns! A wave of energy, of pure, agonizing hope, surged through the city. People dropped their tools, their baskets, and ran. They ran through the streets, up the hills, to the cliffs, to the harbor. King Evan gripped the stone parapet, his knuckles white, his old heart hammering against his ribs so hard he thought it might burst. "The sail!" he croaked, his voice a dry rasp. "By the gods, man, what color is the sail?" The lookout, his hand shielding his eyes, stared at the distant speck. The crowd below fell into a deathly perfect silence, waiting. The lookout's arms slowly dropped to his side. His voice, when it came, was flat, dead, and full of a terrible broken sorrow. My king. It is the black sail. The sails are black." The word black seemed to hang in the air for an eternity before it landed, like a stone, on the crowd. A single, collective groan of despair rose from the people. It was the sound of a city's heart breaking. "No," Evan whispered. "He refused it. No. He is wrong. His eyes are young. He is wrong." The king pushed past his guards, his frail body trembling. He stumbled to the very edge of the cliff. His own failing, old eyes strained. The ship was closer now. It was unmistakable. It was his son's ship, its rigging cutting a familiar line. And its sails were vast, full, and as black as a funeral shroud. The black sail. The signal of death. The sign he had dreaded. The hope that had sustained the old king, that had been his only food and drink for weeks, vanished. It was not just grief that he felt. It was a cold, absolute, and consuming despair. His son, his only son, his newfound heir, was dead. Theo, the Lion of Athens, had failed. He was gone, devoured in the dark, just like all the others. The curse was not broken. The monster had won. His lineage was ended. His city was doomed, forever, to pay this blood price. And in his mind, it was all his fault. His fault for the pride that had led to the death of Andrew King, Marcus's son, all those decades ago. The bill had finally, permanently, come due. He was an old man, and his son was dead. There was nothing left to live for. "My son," he whispered, tears streaming down his wind-chapped face. "My son, Theo." Before his guards, themselves frozen in their own grief, could react, King Evan climbed onto the stone railing. He looked down, not at the people, but at the churning dark water so far below. "I will join him," he said, his voice calm and final. And he leapt. The King of Athens, the man who had given his name to the sea, fell from the high cliff and was consumed by the waves. Moments later, the black-sailed ship, its crew unaware, rounded the final point and entered the harbor. Prince Theo stood on the prow. He was a hero. His wounds were bound. At his side, her hand in his, was Princess Ariana. Behind him, the 5 survivors were waving, their faces streaked with tears of joyous relief. "Athens!" Theo roared, a triumphant cry. "We are home. The beast is dead." But the welcome was not what he expected. The docks were crowded, but no one was cheering. The people were wailing. They were screaming, pointing, not at him, but at the cliffs high above. "What is it?" Ariana asked, her hand tightening on his arm. "Why are they crying?" A royal courtier, his face a mask of unbelievable tragedy, ran to the dock as the ship was being tied. He fell to his knees. my prince, you are alive," he cried, his voice breaking. "But, my lord, you are now king." "King?" Theo asked, his heart seizing, his blood running cold. He stepped onto the dock. "Where is my father? Where is King Evan? I must tell him the news. I am home." The courtier, his body shaking with sobs, could not look at him. He pointed a trembling finger at the mast. The sail, my king. He saw the sail. Theo's mind went blank. The sail? He was on the cliff, the courtier choked out. He has been there for weeks. He saw the black sail, my lord. He thought you were dead. He thought you had failed. The courtier looked up, his eyes full of a terrible new grief, and pointed to the cliff's edge. He could not bear it. He is gone. He leapt from the cliffs. He is in the sea. Theo did not move. He did not breathe. He just slowly, agonizingly, looked up. He looked past the cheering survivors, past the crying Ariana, and up the mast of his own ship. He saw the great, black canvas, flapping in the wind. The sail that had carried him to victory. The white sail. The promise. His father. He had forgotten. In his joy, in his exhaustion, in his love for Ariana, he had forgotten. The victory, the freedom, the cheering, it all turned to ash in his mouth. He staggered, falling to his knees on the stone dock. He had slain the monster in the L. The world stopped. The cheering of the survivors, the wailing of the crowd, the sound of the wind and sea, it all faded into a deafening hollow roar in Prince Theo's ears. His father was dead. He had run from the palace, a prince on a suicidal quest, and he had returned a king, his crown paid for by his own careless mistake. The black sail, flapping idly above him, was a flag of mockery. A courtier, the same one who had delivered the news, gently touched his arm. "My king," he said, his voice thick. "The people, the city, they need you." The touch, the words, they broke the spell. But the man who stood up was not the same man who had knelt. The passionate, arrogant, and joyful hero, Theo, was gone, burned away in that instant of agonizing realization. The man who rose to his feet was King Theo, and his grief was a cold, hard, heavy thing. It was not the grief of a son. It was the grief of a monarch, an armor he was already building around his heart. "Retrieve my father's body," he commanded, his voice flat and devoid of all emotion. "Prepare the royal funeral pyre. On the cliffs. Where he fell." He turned, his face a mask of stone, and looked at the 5 survivors, who were now silent, their own joy stolen. Then he looked at Princess Ariana, whose face was a mirror of his own horror. She had not signed up for this. She had helped him kill a monster, not a king. "Take the princess to the guest quarters in the palace," he ordered the guards, who had just arrived. "See that she is comfortable. The survivors will be taken to the healers. They will be honored." He did not look at Ariana as he said it. He could not meet her eyes. He turned his back on the harbor, on the ship, on the sea that held his father, and walked alone up the path to the palace, the silent, wailing crowd parting before him. The next 3 days were a blur of grief and statecraft. The city of Athens was in a state of profound shock. They had their children back, or at least 5 of them. They had their freedom. The monster that had haunted their nightmares for 27 years was dead. And their king, the old man who had grieved with them, was also dead, a victim of that same freedom. The 5 survivors told their story, over and over, to the weeping crowds and the stone-faced courtiers. They spoke of the absolute darkness, of the screams of their lost friends, of the monster's red eyes and foul breath. And they spoke of Theo. They told of how he hunted the beast, how he fought it in the dark, how he had led them, wounded, back to the light. The city, torn in two, found a new consensus. They had a hero. They had a slayer. They had a king who had, in his first act, freed them from their greatest terror. His mistake, the black sail, was a tragedy, yes, but it was a human one. It was the mistake of a man, not the failure of a king. And then there was Ariana. She was a ghost in the palace. She was the daughter of the enemy, the child of the man who had demanded their children. The court treated her with a cold, fearful courtesy. She was the Cretan woman. She was the princess traitor. They whispered that she was a sorceress, that she had charmed Theo, that she was the one who had made him forget the sail, a final, spiteful curse from her father. Ariana, who had betrayed her own blood for this man, found herself more alone than she had ever been in her father's court. On the 3rd day, the day of the funeral, Theo finally emerged from his seclusion. He had spent the time in his father's empty chambers, not grieving, but thinking. He was a king now, and a king's first duty is to his people, not to his heart. He presided over the funeral. It was a massive, solemn event. King Evan's body, wrapped in royal purple, was placed on a great pyre of oak and pine, built on the very cliff from which he had leapt. Theo, in black armor, his face unreadable, took the torch. He looked out at his people. "My father is dead," he said, his voice carrying on the wind. He died of a broken heart, a grief planted by our enemy, and watered by my own unforgivable forgetfulness. I will not stand here and ask for your pardon. It is too late for that. I will not ask for your love. I will instead ask for your trust." He raised the torch. "I am King Theo. I have taken your shame and buried it in its own labyrinth. I will now take your grief, and I will forge it into a new sword. I will make Athens so strong, so powerful, that no tyrant, no king, and no monster will ever dare to demand a single child from us again. This I swear on my father's pyre." He plunged the torch into the wood. The flames roared to life. The crowd, moved by his cold, brutal honesty, roared its approval. "King Theo! King Theo!" That night, Ariana found him on that same now empty cliff, staring at the smoldering ashes. "That was a king's speech," she said, her voice soft. He did not turn. "It was the only speech I had." "Theo," she said, stepping closer, "you cannot do this. You cannot shut me out. I am the only person alive who knows what you truly did. I am the only one who was there." "And that is the problem," he said, his voice quiet, but as cold as the sea below. "What?" she said, stunned. He finally turned to face her. His eyes were not the eyes of the man who had looked at her on the ship. They were the eyes of his father, the eyes of a king, old and weary. "When I look at you, Ariana," he said, each word a carefully placed stone, "I am reminded of my journey. I am reminded of my victory. And I am reminded of the price. When I look at you, I see the black sail." "That is not fair," she cried, tears welling. "That is not my fault. It was the chaos. The escape. You were wounded." "It doesn't matter what is fair," he countered. "It matters what is. I am king of this city. A city that hates your father. A city that, right now, is willing to blame you for my father's death. They say you are a witch who distracted me. And you. Do you believe that?" she whispered, her heart breaking. "I believe," he said, looking away, "that my father is dead, and that I am now king. My life is not my own. It belongs to Athens. And Athens needs a king who is beyond reproach. They do not need a king who marries the daughter of their greatest enemy, a living reminder of their submission." "So, what happens to me?" she said, the cold truth dawning. "After everything. After I betrayed my home, my father. For you? Am I your prisoner?" "No," he said. "You are an exile. You are free." He motioned to the harbor, where a small, fast ship was being provisioned. "I have given you gold, a loyal crew, and guards. You can go anywhere. To Sicily. To Egypt. Anywhere but here. You cannot be my queen. You cannot be my anything." She stared at him, at this cold stranger who had taken the place of her hero. This was the true abandonment. Not on a deserted island, but in a crowded, grieving city. He was sacrificing her for his crown. "I see," she said, her voice hollow. She did not cry. She had no tears left. "You have become your father, King Marcus, after all. Burying your shame. Burying your problem. Goodbye, Theo. You slew the monster, but I think today, you've created a new one." She turned and walked away, not looking back. King Theo stood alone on the cliff, his father's ashes at his feet, the woman who had saved him sailing away into the darkness. He had freed his city. He had avenged its children. He had gained a kingdom. And he had lost, utterly and completely, everything else. While Athens mourned its old king and uneasily crowned its new one, the island of Crete was a powder keg, and the fuse had just been lit. The alarm, raised when the harbor guards were found, had sent soldiers scrambling to the labyrinth. They found the great stone door unbarred, pushed open just a crack. It took 24 men to roll it fully aside. They descended the ramp with torches, their spears leveled, expecting to find escaped prisoners cowering in the dark. They found a tomb. First, they found the lost tributes, the 8 Athenians who had scattered in the panic. Their bodies were broken, tossed aside in the dark corridors. The soldiers, hardened as they were, looked away. This was the monster's grim work. Then, they found the lair. The torches cut through the oppressive darkness, illuminating the slick, black walls, the mountains of bones, and the thing at its center. It was the Minotaur. It lay on its side, its massive form still, its bull's head twisted at an unnatural angle. The great Cretan sword that had belonged to the palace guard was still embedded deep in its throat. The beast's dark, thick blood was a sticky cooling pool on the stone floor. And leading away from the corpse, disappearing back toward the entrance, was a single, impossibly thin, golden thread. The soldiers, who had lived their whole lives in fear of this thing, of the roars from the earth, were silent. The creature that had been the dark, beating heart of their kingdom's power was just meat. The news was brought to King Marcus. He was in the throne room, already raging over the escape of the Athenian ship. When the captain of his guard, his face pale, knelt and delivered the report, the king's rage evaporated, replaced by a cold, silent disbelief. Dead. Marcus whispered. Slain, my king. The Athenian prince. It had to be him. The sword it was a Cretan blade. The girl, Marcus said, his voice quiet. He now saw it all. The defiance of the prince. The sword. The string. His own daughter, Ariana, had been the architect of his ruin. She had not just fled with a lover. She had armed the enemy. She had given him the secret. She had betrayed her father, her kingdom, and the memory of her brother Andrew. The king's fury was terrible to behold. He did not yell. He did not scream. He just stood, his body shaking with a pressure that seemed to crack his very bones. His entire life's work, his system of power built on fear, his vengeance against Athens, it was all built upon the dark secret in that maze. And now the secret was dead, killed by a boy, and the string that led out of the darkness was held by his own treacherous daughter. News spread through the city of Knossos, not by royal decree, but by the whispers of the soldiers, the servants, the priests. The monster is dead. The Athenian killed it. The labyrinth is empty. The princess, she helped him. The people of Crete did not cheer. They did not celebrate. A strange, new, and dangerous emotion took them, anger. They were angry, not at Athens, but at their own king. They had been forced to live in the shadow of his shame, to participate in the grim, bloody ritual of the tribute, all to feed a problem he had hidden beneath the palace. Their taxes, their honor, their piety, it had all been spent to protect his cursed secret. The lords of the other Cretan cities, who had long chafed under Marcus's iron-fisted rule, saw their chance. His power was not divine, it was built on a single, vulnerable monster. And now that monster was gone. The foundation of his authority was rotted away. King Marcus, in his paranoid, collapsing world, needed someone to blame. He could not reach Theo, who was now a king. He could not reach Ariana, who was lost to the sea. So, he remembered the beginning. He remembered the man who had built the hollow cow. The man who had built the labyrinth. David Dalian, he roared, his voice echoing in the now empty throne room. This is his fault. His design. He must have told his son, Isaac, the secret. The boy must have told someone before he died. Dalian. It was always Dalian. He forgot that Dalian had been his prisoner for years. His rage, irrational and absolute, seized on the architect. He sent out a decree to his scattered, mutinous fleet. Find me David Dalian, the man who built the labyrinth. Hunt him in Sicily. Hunt him in the farthest corners of the world. I want his head. He is the traitor who brought down my house. The hunt for the architect, a desperate, obsessive quest, became the king's final, mad act. It was the last spasm of a dying power. While King Marcus was dispatching ships to hunt a ghost in Sicily, King Theo was in Athens, building a new reality. He did not sit on his new throne, consumed by his grief. He stood in the shipyards. He had fulfilled his promise on his father's pyre. He was forging his grief into a sword. He emptied the treasury, not on palaces, but on timber, on bronze, on rope. He, who had been on the receiving end of Cretan sea power, knew what Athens needed. He was building a fleet. He was training a new army, not of conscripts, but of proud citizens, the men who would no longer send their children to die. He was fast. He was brilliant. He was cold. He was turning Athens from a city of poets and victims into a city of warriors and survivors. He was preparing for the war he knew King Marcus must surely wage. But the war never came. The power had shifted. The news of Theo's victory, of the Minotaur's death, spread to every island, every port. The states that had paid homage to Crete now sent their ambassadors, and their trade ships, to Athens. The old king, Marcus, was left alone. His lords had abandoned him. His fleet was on a madman's errand. His daughter was gone. His sons were dead. He was a tyrant with no one left to terrorize. Months after the escape, King Marcus, an old broken man, walked down the dark ramp into the labyrinth. He had not allowed the monster's body to be moved. He walked through the dark, twisting halls, his single torch illuminating the bones. He finally reached the lair. The beast was still there, a great, rotting, skeletal shadow. The golden string was still on the floor. He looked at the dead creature, his stepson, his shame, his source of power. He, who had once been the most powerful king in the world, was now a prisoner in his own empty maze. He was a man, just like Theo, who was completely and utterly alone. The death of the Minotaur had not just been the death of a beast. It was the death of an era. The curse of Crete was finally broken, its power dissolved, and a new power, forged in the dark by a hero's sword, was rising in Athens. Years passed. The story of the Minotaur, the Labyrinth, and the Black Sail faded from a raw, painful memory into a legend. King Theo of Athens proved to be as good as his word. His grief and guilt, which had cost him his father and his love, became the mortar for his kingdom. He built a fleet that rivaled Crete's. He fortified his city's walls until they were declared unbreakable. He established new laws and a court of justice. Athens, once a city of victims, became a city of power. And King Theo, the Slayer, was its respected, brilliant, and deeply lonely ruler. He had advisors, and he had subjects, but he had no equals. He was a man who had been to the dark and returned, and it had set him apart. Far to the north, in the rugged mountainous kingdom of Thessaly, another king ruled. This was King Patrick of the Lapiths, a man as boisterous and wild as Theo was cold and controlled. Patrick was a warrior king, known for his laughter, his strength, and his brawling. He heard the stories of Theo of Athens, the man who had slain a monster and become a king by tragedy. He was, in a word, intrigued. He wanted to know if this slayer was a true king, or just a lucky politician. So, King Patrick decided to find out. In a brazen act of royal provocation, Patrick and his best warriors rode down from the mountains and raided a field near Marathon, the very same fields where the white bull had once roamed. They rounded up a herd of King Theo's finest royal cattle. It was not an act of war, it was an invitation. It was a test. The news reached Athens, and Theo's court was outraged. But Theo, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. A challenge. He didn't send a general. He didn't send an ambassador. He put on his black armor, the same he had worn at his father's funeral, mounted his warhorse, and led his personal guard on a hard ride north. He found Patrick and his men on a hillside, brazenly roasting one of the stolen steers over a fire. "The king of the Lapiths, I presume," Theo called out, his voice cold. "You have a novel way of introducing yourself." "Those are my cattle." King Patrick stood up. He was a mountain of a man, with a thick red beard and a laugh that shook the trees. He was like Theo in his prime. "And you are Theo the Slayer," Patrick boomed, wiping grease from his beard. "I heard you were fast. I just wanted to see for myself." "You've seen me," Theo said, his hand on his sword. "Now return what you've stolen, before my men teach you the difference between a mountain brawl and an Athenian war." Patrick laughed, a full-bellied, genuine sound. He looked at Theo, at his cold eyes, his ready stance, his lack of fear. He saw a man who had faced true monsters, not just cattle thieves. He saw his equal. He dropped his spear. "I am impressed," Patrick said, walking forward, his hands open. "Keep the cattle. A gift. I came here to test a rival, and I have found a brother. I am Patrick of the Lapiths, and I offer you my friendship." Theo was stunned. He had been alone for so long, surrounded by advisors and servants. He had never, since the day he'd stepped on that black-sailed ship, had a friend. He looked at this wild, laughing king, and for the first time since his father's death, his hard, cold mask of kingship cracked. He, too, lowered his sword. Thus began the most famous friendship of the age. Theo and Patrick became brother kings. They hunted together, fought back to back, and advised one another. The cold, calculating mind of Theo was tempered by the passionate, fiery heart of Patrick. A year later, a messenger arrived in Athens with joyous news. King Patrick was getting married. His bride was a princess of legendary beauty, Diane, and Theo was to be the guest of honor. "It will be the greatest feast this land has ever seen." Patrick had written in his own rough hand, "Everyone is invited. We will drink the mountains dry." Theo arrived in Thessaly to a kingdom in full celebration. The wedding was to be held in a great, open-air cave system, a massive hall of stone under the mountains. The bride, Diane, was as lovely as promised. But as the guests assembled, Theo felt that old familiar chill of dread, the same he had felt in the Labyrinth. King Patrick, in his booming, generous nature, had indeed invited everyone. This included his distant, strange, and savage neighbors, the centaurs. They were not the noble creatures of later stories. They were a wild, half-civilized tribe, half man and half horse, who lived by their most basic and brutal instincts. They were, in a strange, twisted way, King Patrick's cousins, descended from the same mythical, cursed bloodline. Patrick, in an act of goodwill, had invited them to his wedding feast, hoping to finally forge a peace. "They are my family, Theo," Patrick had insisted, clapping his friend on the back. "They are rough, yes, but this is a day for peace. We must show them we are civilized, and they will follow." Theo was not so sure. He watched as the centaurs entered the great hall. There were dozens of them. Their human torsos were thick with muscle, their equine bodies powerful and restless. Their hooves clicked and scraped on the stone floor. They brought with them the smell of unwashed fur, stale wine, and a kind of primal animal musk. The feast began. The Labyrinths, Patrick's people, were loud and joyous, but civilized. They drank their wine from mixing bowls and clay cups. They ate from platters. The centaurs, gathered at their own massive, low tables, were not. They tore at the roasted meat with their bare hands. They ignored the mixing bowls and drank the strong, unwatered wine straight from the skins, their laughter turning to loud, drunken brays. Theo, seated at the high table next to Patrick, watched them. His gaze fell on their leader, a massive brute of a centaur named Eric. Eric was not eating. He was drinking, and he was staring. His eyes, bloodshot and leering, were fixed on one person and one person only, the bride, Diane. Every time she laughed, every time she spoke to her new husband, the centaur Eric would grunt, slam his fist on the table, and drink again, his eyes growing darker. Theo, who knew better than anyone what happened when the veneer of civilization was stripped away, when a monstrous instinct was allowed to fester, leaned over to his friend. "Patrick," he said, his voice low and urgent, "you must send them away. Now, before this goes too far." Patrick, his face flushed with wine and his own happiness, laughed. "Theo, my brother, you are too grim. This is a wedding, not a labyrinth. They are just rough. They're family. Look at them. They are celebrating." "They are not celebrating," Theo said, his hand instinctively moving to the hilt of the sword he wore, even to a feast. "They are animals, and you have just shown them the one thing they want and cannot have." "Nonsense!" Patrick roared, draining his own cup. "It is my wedding day. There will be no more talk of monsters. There is only peace here." Theo looked back at the centaur's table. King Eric had just stood up, his massive, four-legged body knocking over a table. He let out a drunken, challenging roar, and his dark, lust-filled eyes were still fixed, unblinking, on the beautiful and suddenly terrified bride. King Patrick, his face flushed with wine and joy, clapped his friend on the back. "Nonsense, Theo. It's a party. They're just rough. What's the worst that could happen?" As if in answer, the music in the great hall swelled. King Patrick, smiling, stood and raised his heavy wine cup. "A toast," he bellowed, his voice silencing the room. "A toast to my wife, my queen, the beautiful Diane." He turned to his bride, and in a moment of pure, civilized affection, he kissed her. The Labyrinth warriors and their families cheered and raised their cups. The centaurs did not. At the far end of the hall, their leader Eric, who had been swaying on his hooves, his eyes fixed on the bride, saw the kiss. And something in his savage, drunken mind snapped. The thin veneer of civilization shattered. This was not a feast, it was a challenge. This was not his cousin's wife, this was a prize. "Mine!" he roared, a sound that was half human and half stallion. In a single, shocking motion, Eric leapt. His massive, four-legged body sailed over the lower tables and landed with a crash of splintering wood and shattering pottery directly on the high table. The Labyrinth nobles scattered, screaming. "Patrick!" Theo yelled, but it was too late. Eric, in his drunken rage, reared his front hooves and kicked King Patrick square in the chest, sending him flying backward off the platform, his crown skittering across the stone floor. Before Diane could even scream, the centaur grabbed her. He snagged her by the waist with one massive, powerful arm, threw her over his horse's back like a sack of grain, and turned to bound out of the hall. The entire cave fell silent for one, stunned, heart-stopping second. And that act, that single, violent abduction, was the spark. The other centaurs, their own blood fired by the unwatered wine and the scent of violence, went mad. It was a riot in an instant. They too rose up. They overturned the tables, they seized the nearest Labyrinth women, they grabbed serving boys, they howled and brayed. The wedding feast had, in an instant, become a war zone. The Labyrinth men, their cups still in their hands, were frozen in shock. They were at a party. They were unarmed. But King Theo was not. He had been expecting this. He had not slain a monster in the dark to be fooled by one in the light. Before Eric could take 2 strides toward the exit, Theo was there, his chair kicked back, his royal cloak thrown aside, and his Cretan sword, the one he had taken from the labyrinth, in his hand. He was a black-armored shadow blocking the centaur's path. "Put her down," Theo said, his voice a low, cold command. Eric, his eyes rolling, his captive bride screaming and beating on his back, just snarled. He did not have a weapon. He was a weapon. He lunged at Theo, swinging a human fist the size of a boulder. Theo ducked. The fist whistled over his head and smashed into a stone pillar, sending chips of rock flying. The brawl was on. "To me, Lapiths!" A new roar echoed through the hall. King Patrick was back on his feet, his face a mask of purple rage. His crown was gone, his royal tunic was torn, but his eyes were fire. He didn't have a sword. He looked around, saw a massive ornamental bronze cauldron, still half full of wine, and lifted it. With a primal yell, he hurled it, end over end, at a centaur who was trying to drag a woman away. The cauldron struck the creature in the chest, crushing its ribs and sending it to the floor. "Drive the animals out!" Patrick bellowed, grabbing a burning log from the hearth. "Arm yourselves!" His people, shocked back to life, obeyed. The feast hall became a scene from a nightmare. The Lapith men, civilized warriors, tore the legs from the heavy oak tables to use as clubs. They shattered wine jugs and used the pointed shards as daggers. They fought, not with skill, but with the desperation of men defending their homes, their wives, their children. It was a brutal, ugly, and primal fight. The centaurs had the advantage of weight and raw, animal strength. Their hooves were lethal, their fists like hammers. But the Lapiths, led by their king, were defending their world. And in the center of it all was Theo. He was a whirlwind of practiced, deadly motion. He was not a brawler. He was a slayer. His black armor and Cretan sword moved through the chaos, a single point of cold, lethal focus. He was not just fighting, he was hunting. His target was Eric. The centaur leader, seeing his escape blocked, had dropped Diane to the floor, shoving her behind him. "I will kill you, man-thing," he roared and charged. Theo, the hero of Crete, had faced a charging half-bull monster in a dark, narrow corridor. A half-horse monster in an open hall was nothing. He was, at his core, a bull leaper, a man of impossible agility. He did not meet the charge. He used it. As Eric thundered toward him, Theo ran at him. At the last second, he planted his foot and used the centaur's own charging shoulder as a springboard. He vaulted into the air, landing perfectly, lightly, on the centaur's broad, equine back. Eric roared in surprised fury, bucking and rearing, trying to dislodge the man, but Theo's balance was perfect. He was in the one place the centaur's fists and hooves could not reach. "Get off!" Eric screamed, his human torso twisting in a futile attempt to grab him. "You should have stayed in your mountains," Theo said. He was clinging to the creature's back with his legs. He raised the Cretan sword high and plunged it down once with all his strength into the vulnerable human spine, just at the base of the neck. There was a wet, choking sound. Eric's body went rigid. He stumbled, his horse legs buckling beneath him. He crashed to the floor, dead. Theo leapt clear, landing gracefully on his feet. He grabbed the terrified, weeping Diane and pulled her to safety behind the remains of the high table, where her husband, Patrick, was now fighting. "She's safe," Theo yelled. Patrick, having just broken his log over a centaur's skull, saw his wife. He gave Theo a bloody, wild-eyed grin. The other centaurs, their drunken courage already fading, saw their leader fall. It broke them. The tide of the battle turned in an instant. Their animal lust gave way to animal panic. "They've killed Eric. Flee! Flee!" The Lapiths, now armed and enraged, let out a triumphant roar. This was no longer a desperate defense. It was a rout. They surged forward, a wave of civilized fury, and drove the panicking centaurs from the hall. The sounds of battle turned into the sounds of a stampede, as the surviving centaurs fled into the night, back to the mountains where they belonged. The hall was a smoking ruin. The floor was slick with spilled wine and dark blood. The bodies of a dozen Lapiths and twice as many centaurs lay among the shattered remnants of the feast. But the women were safe. The children were safe. In the center of the wreckage, King Theo and King Patrick stood back to back, their makeshift weapons dripping. They were covered in gore, breathing heavily, their bodies bruised. Patrick looked around at the destruction of his wedding, and then at Theo. He threw back his head and let out a raw, relieved laugh. "Well, brother," he panted, clapping Theo on his armored shoulder. "You were right. They are terrible guests. But you are the best friend a king could ever have." Their brotherhood, which had begun as a challenge, was now sealed forever in blood and battle. The Battle of the Wedding Feast, as it came to be known, was a brutal and bloody affair, but it had a profound effect. The Lapith kingdom, though scarred, was saved. The surviving centaurs, their leader Eric slain and their pride broken, scattered back into the highest, darkest mountain valleys, and were never again a threat to the civilized world. King Patrick and his new wife Diane had begun their marriage in fire, and it had forged them into a new kind of royal couple, one defined by resilience and a shared, fierce loyalty. But the greatest effect was on the brotherhood of the two kings. Theo, who had been a lone, cold ruler, now had a true friend, a brother in arms. And Patrick, the boisterous brawler, now had an advisor whose wisdom he respected as much as his strength. Their alliance was sealed. Theo returned to Athens a hero twice over, first as the slayer of the Minotaur, and now as the defender of civilization. His reputation was immense. His new fleet controlled the seas, and his city was strong. He had built the peace his father had only dreamed of, and he had done it through cold, hard work. Yet, the palace was quiet, and the throne was, as it had always been, a lonely seat. One midsummer morning, a new ship was spotted on the horizon. It was not an Athenian ship, nor a trade vessel from the north. It was a Cretan warship, but it was not flying the colors of King Marcus. It flew a simple white flag of truce. An embassy of Cretan lords, the same men who had once cowered before King Marcus, requested an audience with King Theo. Theo met them in his throne room. "You are brave to come here," Theo said, his voice as cold as the sea. "The war between our cities has never been officially ended." The eldest lord, a man named Cassion, bowed low. "That, King Theo, is why we are here. The war is over. King Marcus is dead." Theo's expression did not change. "How?" "As you left him," the lord replied. "Broken. His power was a shadow, held up only by the fear of the beast you slew. When that fear was gone, his authority crumbled. He spent his last year dispatching phantom fleets to hunt the architect, David Dalian, a man long gone. My king, he was found dead. Inside the labyrinth. He had been there for days, alone in the darkness, having died of madness and a broken heart." Theo was silent. The man who had been his greatest enemy, the tyrant who had demanded his life, had died just as his own father had, of a broken heart. The cycle was complete. "Crete is in chaos," the Lord continued, stepping forward. "We are a nation of merchants and sea captains, but we have no ruler. The old bloodline is complicated. The people are frightened. We do not want more war, King Theo. We want an alliance." "An alliance?" Theo said, his eyes narrowing. "You who served him, now come to me for help?" "We served him out of fear," Cassion said. "You freed us from that fear. We see the power you have built here. We see your fleet. We do not wish to be your enemy. We wish to join you. Let us unite our two great powers, the Cretan trade routes and the Athenian fleet. Let us rule the sea together, as allies." Theo sat back on his throne. This was an offer of total victory, achieved without a single further drop of blood. It was the political masterstroke of a generation. And the price for this alliance? The Lord took a deep breath. A marriage. To unite our bloodlines and seal the pact. King Marcus is dead. Princess Ariana is in exile, her name cursed on our island for her treason. But there is one heir left. The king's youngest daughter. The one who stayed. The Princess Chloe. The name hit Theo like a physical blow. Chloe. Ariana's sister. The pale, frightened girl he had seen standing by her father's throne, the day he was paraded as a sacrifice. He remembered her haunted eyes. To marry her, it was unthinkable. It felt like a betrayal. A betrayal of his father, whose death was so wrapped up in the Cretan curse. A betrayal of Ariana, the woman he had abandoned, to now marry her sister. It felt unclean. But he was a king. He could not answer. He told the ambassadors he would consider their offer. That night, he rode north, alone, to the one man whose counsel he trusted. He found King Patrick helping his men rebuild the Great Hall. His wife, Diane, was pregnant, and the kingdom was full of life and industry. Theo, the lonely king, watched his friend, the happy father-to-be, and his heart was heavy. They sat that night by a fire, the two kings. Theo laid out the problem. "My heart, Patrick, my heart says no. It feels like a desecration. It feels like I am marrying the very house that killed my father and drove Ariana from my life." Patrick, who had spent the day hammering beams, looked at his friend. The boisterous warrior was gone, replaced by a thoughtful king. "Brother," he said, "you and I are different. I rule with my heart. I almost lost my kingdom for it. You rule with your head, and that is why Athens is strong. We are not just men, Theo. We are kings. Our hearts, they belong to us." But our hands, our names, they belong to our people. What do your people need? They need this alliance, Theo admitted, his voice low. It would mean permanent peace. It would mean our ships rule the world. It would end the blood feud forever. Then it is not a choice, Patrick said, placing a heavy hand on his shoulder. It is a duty. It is the curse of the throne. You buried your grief for your father to become a king. Now it seems, you must bury your memory of the sister to be one. Theo rode back to Athens, his mind clear, his heart as cold and hard as the marble of his new temples. He had made his decision. He summoned the Cretan lords. I accept your terms, he said, his voice echoing in the hall. The war is over. Send for the Princess Chloe. She will be my wife. She will be the new queen of Athens. A month later, the Cretan ship returned. But this time, it was a royal barge, draped in purple and gold. A woman stepped onto the dock. It was Chloe. But she was not the pale, trembling girl Theo remembered. She was a woman now, hardened by the fall of her family, and deeply, terribly aware of what she was. She was a political sacrifice, a living treaty. She was beautiful, with the same dark hair as her sister, but her eyes were different. They were not fiery, like Ariana's. They were deep, quiet, and full of a sadness that matched his own. King Theo, the Slayer, met her on the docks. The very same docks where he had collapsed in grief over his father. The very same docks where he had banished her sister, Ariana. He was in his formal, black armor. She was in her formal, white, Cretan robes. The people of Athens, confused but hopeful, cheered. This was peace. This was victory. Theo took her hand. It was cold. He did not smile. Princess, he said, his voice a formal proclamation. Welcome to Athens. My king, she replied, her voice a soft, unbroken whisper. He led his new bride, the last living remnant of the house of the Minotaur, up the hill to the palace. He had secured his kingdom. He had ended the war. He had done his duty. And in doing so, he had just invited a new, and perhaps more tragic story into his lonely life. The marriage of King Theo and Queen Chloe was exactly what it was intended to be, a political success and a personal failure. It was a formal, cold, and quiet union. Theo, the king, was a man who had buried his heart on a cliffside and banished its memory to the sea. He treated his new young wife with a king's respect, but a husband's coldness. He was polite, he was distant, and he was consumed by the work of his state. The people of Athens were relieved. The alliance with Crete held. Their power was secure. Their new queen was beautiful, quiet, and graceful. But those in the palace saw the truth. They saw a lonely, young woman, an exile in a foreign land, married to a living monument. Queen Chloe was living in the shadow of her sister Ariana, the woman her husband had actually loved, and in the shadow of his father, the man her husband had accidentally killed. It was a cold, joyless, and empty life. Into this quiet, cold palace, a new element arrived. He was a spark of wild, untamed fire. He was Prince Julian, King Theo's only son. Julian was not the son of Chloe. He was not the son of any queen. He was the product of Theo's wild youth, years before the Labyrinth, from a brief and passionate affair with Annabelle, a warrior princess of the Amazons. Julian had been raised, not in the confines of a city, but in the open wilderness of his mother's homeland. He was a child of the forest. He arrived in Athens as a young man, and he was the opposite of his father. Where Theo was dark, controlled, and political, Julian was bright, radiant, and pure. He was an athlete, a hunter, a creature of sunlight and physical grace. He was beautiful, but he was also different. He scorned the city. He hated the smoke, the crowds, the endless political whispers of the court. He spent all his time in the hills outside Athens, hunting, running, and sleeping under the stars. He was, in short, a man who loved nature, not people. He worshipped only the gods of the wild, dedicating himself with a fierce, pure-hearted devotion to the goddess of the hunt. He had no time for the games of the city, and even less time for its passions. He was polite to his new stepmother, Queen Chloe, but he barely saw her. He was, in his own bright way, as remote as his father. But this very purity, this devotion, had an unseen consequence. It had earned him a divine enemy. The goddess of love, known as Venus, looked down on this young prince and was insulted. Venus, the source of all mortal passion, saw a man who openly scorned her power. Julian built no altars to her. He offered her no prayers. He treated love not as a virtue, but as a weakness, a messy urban distraction from the purity of the hunt. He thinks he can ignore me, the goddess whispered, her voice sounding in the rustle of the olive trees. He, a mere mortal, thinks he can live his life untouched by my power? I, who can topple kings and begin wars. I will show him. I will not break him with love. I will use love to break the world around him. I will make him the center of a passion so twisted, so profane, it will destroy his entire house. And so, the goddess, in her spite, shot an arrow. But the arrow was not for Julian. It was for his lonely, young, and vulnerable stepmother, Queen Chloe. The curse did not settle slowly. It struck like a viper. One day, Chloe looked upon her stepson, Julian, as he returned from the hunt, his face flushed with exertion, his hair wild, a picture of pure animal grace. And the divine poison of Venus flooded her heart. It was not admiration. It was not affection. It was a sick, burning, and all-consuming desire. It was, in its own terrible way, the same unholy madness that had struck her mother, Queen Patricia, all those years ago. The curse of Crete, the one that had spawned the Minotaur, had not died. It had merely been dormant, carried in the bloodline, and it had now found a new, terrible purpose in Athens. Queen Chloe was horrified by her own mind. She, the wife of the king, was now obsessed with his son. She felt a profound, burning shame. She, who had been a political sacrifice, was now a divine one. She did what her mother had done. She retreated. She locked herself in her chambers. She refused to eat. She grew pale, thin, and feverish, wasting away. The royal healers were baffled. It was a sickness, they said, but not of the body. It was of the soul. King Theo, her husband, visited her. He was concerned, but in his cold, dutiful way. He saw her as a political ally who was failing. Queen Chloe, he had said, you must recover. The alliance must be seen to be strong. Your weakness, it creates rumors. His coldness was like salt in her wound. He was not a husband, he was a partner. And he had no idea of the fire that was consuming her. Only one person saw the truth. Her old, Cretan nurse, a woman who had come with her from Knossos, who had known her since she was a child. The nurse, loyal to a fault, sat by her mistress's bed, bathing her forehead, pleading with her. My lady, my queen, you are dying, the old woman wept. You must tell me what it is. Is it a poison? Is it a curse? I cannot help you if you do not speak. Chloe, in a fit of fevered delirium, her mind broken by the shame and the unnatural passion, finally confessed. It is not a poison, she choked out, clutching the nurse's hand. It is him. It is the prince. Julian. The nurse recoiled, her eyes wide with terror. The king's son. The goddess. Venus. She has done this to me. Chloe wept, her sanity fraying. This love, it is a fire in my blood. It is burning me from the inside out. I cannot bear it. I cannot look at him. I cannot live with this shame. I would rather die. I must die. The old nurse was silent for a long moment, the horrific secret settling in the dark room. She was a practical, amoral, and deeply loyal woman. She had seen the coldness of the king. She saw her beautiful young mistress dying of a love that was, to her, no more than a terrible sickness. No, the nurse said, her voice suddenly firm. This is not your fault. This is a god's cruelty. But if a god's poison has a mortal cure, you will not die. What are you saying? Chloe whispered, horrified. I am saying, the nurse replied, her eyes narrowing, that this is a passion. It is not shame. It is a fire that must be acknowledged. If the prince, if he knew, perhaps his heart is not as pure as it seems. Perhaps a kind word, a gentle acceptance, it would be better than death. No, Chloe cried, trying to sit up. Never. I could never. The shame would kill me. Then you will not have to, the nurse said, standing and smoothing her apron. You will rest. I will go to the prince. I will speak to him for you. I will test the waters. I will be discreet. He is a man, like any other. He cannot deny his queen. It is better to live in a shared secret than to die in a chaste, lonely honor. And before the horrified Queen Chloe could stop her, the old nurse slipped out of the room, her heart set on a disastrous, misguided mission. She walked toward the courtyard, where she could hear the sound of the hunting dogs, signaling that Prince Julian, radiant, innocent, and doomed, had returned. Prince Julian was in the central courtyard, his back to the palace, his face to the sun. He had just returned from the hunt, and he was a picture of vibrant, uncorrupted health. His dogs were resting at his feet, and he was carefully cleaning his hunting spears, his movements economical and precise. He was in his element, the scent of the wild forest still on him, the dust of the city not yet settled. He was at peace. The peace was broken by the sound of soft, hurrying footsteps. The old Cretan nurse approached, her hands wrung together, her face a mask of false concern. Julian looked up, his brow furrowing. He had a hunter's dislike for the palace's indoor servants, with their whispers and their plots. "Good evening, nurse," he said, his voice clear and polite, but cool. "Is the queen, is she feeling any better?" "That is what I must speak with you about, my prince," the old woman said, her voice dropping to a low, conspiratorial hush. She stepped closer, forcing him to pay attention. "Her sickness, it is not for the healers. It is of the heart." Julian stopped his work, his hands still. He was a man of action, of black and white. He had no patience for riddles. A sickness of the heart? Then she should speak to the priests. Or my father. "The king is, as he is," the nurse said, her voice laced with a careful bitterness. "Cold. And the priests cannot cure this. This is a fire, my prince. A fire lit by the goddess, Venus. A passion so strong, it is consuming her. It is a poison for which there is only one antidote." Julian was now deeply uncomfortable. He stood up, towering over the old woman. "Nurse, you are speaking in riddles. You waste my time. If she is ill, I am sorry for it. But what has this to do with me?" "Because, my prince," the nurse hissed, her patience breaking, "you are the antidote." Julian stared at her, his mind failing to comprehend. "I what?" "The queen is dying," the nurse said, her voice a desperate, frantic whisper. "She is wasting away, consumed by a love that is destroying her. A love she did not ask for. A god's curse. And it is a love, a terrible, burning, all-consuming love, for you." For a full second, Julian did not move. He did not breathe. The world seemed to stop. The only sound was the panting of his dogs. His face, which had been open and bright, went perfectly blank with confusion, then disbelief, and then a slow dawning wave of pure, absolute revulsion. He recoiled, physically stumbling back, as if she had thrown a snake at him. "What did you say?" he whispered, his voice shaking. "She cannot help it," the nurse pleaded, sensing her mistake, trying to undo it. "She is a good woman, a virtuous queen. It is a madness, a sickness from the gods." "Sickness?" Julian's voice was no longer a whisper. It was a low, vibrating snarl. He ripped his arm from her grasp as if her hand were red hot. "You come to me, my father's son, and you dare to speak of this filth? It is not filth. It is a tragedy. It is corruption." Julian exploded. His purity, the very core of his being, had been violated. This was not a plea for love, it was an assault. "I knew this city was a sewer. I knew this court was a disease. You people, with your passions, you are all unclean. You with your foul whispered bargains, and she, your queen, with her sick, unnatural, treasonous mind. She is my father's wife." He was shouting now, his voice echoing in the stone courtyard. "Oh, that I could scour this palace clean of you. That I could wash the air of your stench. I worship the pure huntress, and you bring me the refuse of Venus's gutter. I would rather be torn apart by my own hounds than participate in this horror." He was pacing, trembling with a righteous, furious, and deeply violated rage. "I will not be silent. I will not be your antidote. I will go to my father. I will go to the king right now, and I will tell him what kind of nest of vipers he has brought into his house. No, my prince, you mustn't. You will destroy her. She is already destroyed," he spat. "She is a disease, and I will expose her. Please, she is." A sound. A sharp, terrible, broken gasp from the shadows of the colonnade. Julian and the nurse both froze. They looked. Leaning against a marble pillar, her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with a despair so black it seemed to drink the light, was Queen Chloe. She had followed the nurse. She had been terrified of what the old woman might say, and in her terror, she had come to stop her. She had been too late. She had arrived just in time to hear Julian's entire, unfiltered, and disgusted rejection. She had heard him call her filth, corruption, disease. Their eyes met across the courtyard. His were filled with the cold, unforgiving fire of pure, righteous hatred. Hers were the eyes of a person who had just been thrown from a cliff. My queen. The nurse stammered, collapsing. What have I done?" Julian, his face like stone, did not soften. He looked at his stepmother, who was shaking so hard she could barely stand, and he felt no pity, only disgust. He pointed a trembling finger at her. "You," he said, his voice low and final. "You are a plague on this house. I will tell my father. He will deal with you." He turned, his hunting cloak swirling, and stormed out of the courtyard, his boots striking the stone with a final, furious purpose. He was going to the king's chambers. Queen Chloe watched him go. The silence he left behind was absolute. The nurse was weeping at her feet. "My lady, forgive me. I only meant to." Chloe's head came up. The despair in her eyes was gone. The humiliation was gone. The cursed love from Venus was gone, burned away in the fire of his total, absolute, and disgusted rejection. All that was left was terror. He was going to tell Theo, her husband, the cold, just king, the man who had banished her sister for less. He would, what? Kill her, banish her, just like Ariana? She was a cornered animal. And a cornered animal is the most dangerous of all. A new, cold, and terrible cunning flooded her veins. The cunning of her father, King Marcus. The cunning of a survivor. "He will tell the king," she whispered, her voice suddenly, terrifyingly calm. What will we do?" the nurse wept. "Get up," Chloe said. She was no longer shaking. "You have done nothing. I am the one who must act." "My lady!" "He will not tell that." Queen Chloe ran. She did not run from the palace. She ran to her chambers. Her mind, which had been a fog of cursed desire and fever, was now terrifyingly, icily clear. Julian's words echoed in her ears. "Filth, disease, corruption. I will tell my father." She was a cornered animal. He had been her object of desire, and in an instant, he had become her executioner. He, the pure, the radiant, the beloved hero, would go to his father, the cold, just king, and tell him the truth. And what would happen to her? She, the Cretan, the sister of the traitor Ariana, the last member of a cursed house. Theo would not hesitate. He would banish her. He would cast her out, just as he had her sister. The humiliation was unbearable. But the fear was worse. She would not be discarded. She would not be the victim. She burst into her chambers, her old nurse trailing behind, wringing her hands. "My lady, what are we to do?" "Silence," Chloe commanded, her voice no longer trembling. She went to her writing desk. She pulled out a fresh sheet of parchment and a stylus. Her hand, she noted with a strange, cold detachment, was perfectly steady. "He will not tell the king," she said as she began to write. "I will." "My queen," the nurse whispered, confused. "I will tell the king my story first. A story he will believe." She wrote, her stylus flying across the parchment. She wrote to her husband, King Theo. It was a suicide note, a confession, and it was a perfect, vicious, and final lie. She wrote that she could not live with the shame. She wrote that she had been betrayed, that the king's son, Prince Julian, with his wild, uncivilized ways, had not respected the sanctity of his father's house. She wrote that he had seen her, his young stepmother, as a prize, that he had propositioned her. And when she, in her loyalty to Theo, had refused him, he had grown angry. He had forced himself upon her. She wrote that she was taking her own life, unable to bear the shame of the assault, and terrified of what the violent prince would do when she threatened to expose him. It was a masterpiece of manipulation, every word a poisoned arrow aimed at Julian's heart. When she was done, she sealed the note. Then, she went to her heavy travel chest and pulled from it a thick, braided rope. "My lady, no," the nurse gasped, finally understanding. "He called me a disease," Chloe whispered, her eyes dead. "He is right. I will cut out the infection. But I will make sure he is cut out too." She threw the rope over a high, dark ceiling beam. The scene cut. King Theo was in his council chambers, finishing a long, grueling debate over grain tariffs with the newly allied Cretan lords. He was tired. His head ached. He was, as he always was, a king, but he was not a happy man. As he walked back to his private chambers, he was intercepted. His son, Julian, was waiting for him, his face a mask of pale, righteous fury. "Father," Julian said, his voice tight, "I must speak with you. It is a matter of the deepest urgency." "Julian, not now," Theo sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "It has been a long day." "It is about the queen," Julian insisted, stepping in his father's path. She is a corruption. She is a sickness in this." A high-pitched, piercing scream echoed down the marble hall. It was the nurse. Theo's blood ran cold. He and Julian looked at each other, and in that shared moment of alarm, they both ran. They sprinted to the queen's chambers. The door was barred from the inside. "Chloe!" Theo yelled, pounding on the heavy wood. "Open this door!" There was no answer, only the sound of the old nurse's hysterical wailing. "Stand back," Theo commanded. He, the hero of Crete, lowered his shoulder and smashed it against the door. The old lock splintered, and the door flew open. The room was dark. The old nurse was collapsed on the floor, and hanging from the highest ceiling beam, still and silent, was the body of Queen Chloe. Theo froze. Julian let out a choked gasp. "My queen! My lady!" the nurse shrieked, crawling toward the body. "She is gone. She is dead." Theo, his mind numb, his heart a cold stone, stepped forward. He saw it. Clutched in Chloe's cold white hand was the sealed parchment. His name was on it. His hands shaking, he broke the seal and read the note. He read it once. He read it twice. The blood drained from his face, replaced by a slow, rising, dark crimson of pure, unadulterated rage. The air in the room grew heavy and cold. He slowly crumpled the note in his fist. And then, very slowly, he turned. He turned and looked at his son. "You," Theo whispered. The word was a rattling, venomous thing. "Father, I don't know." Julian stammered, his own face pale with the horror of the scene. "You did this," Theo snarled. He took a step toward his son. "She wrote it. All of it. How you attacked her. How you defiled her. How you, my son, drove my wife to this." Julian's mind reeled. "What? No. Father, that is a lie. A monstrous lie. It was the opposite. She. He stopped. His throat closed. He looked at the body of his dead stepmother. He looked at the weeping nurse. And he looked at his father. How could he? How could he speak the truth now? How could he defile the dead and his father's memory of her, with a truth that was, in its own way, just as grotesque? His pride, his absolute, uncompromising purity, made it impossible. I never touched her," Julian said, his voice shaking with his own righteous fury. "I swear to you, by the honor of the huntress, I am innocent." "She is lying. She is dead," Theo roared, lunging forward and slamming his son against the wall. "She is dead, and she left this." "Your honor against a dead woman's final words?" "You lie. I do not." Julian shoved his father back. "I am your son. You know me. I know nothing." Theo bellowed. "I know only what I see. A dead wife and a lying, corrupt, and monstrous son. I am done with you. You are a plague on this house." "Father, no. I banish you," Theo decreed, his voice the voice of a king, final and absolute. "You are no son of mine. You are to leave the lands of Athens before the sun sets. If you are ever seen here again, I will have you hunted down and executed like the animal you are. Now go." Julian's heart broke. His father. His king. He believed the lie. There was nothing left to say. His innocence had been turned against him, and he was defenseless. "I will go," Julian said, his voice suddenly as cold as his father's. "But you are a fool, father. You are blind. And you will live to regret this day for the rest of your life." He turned, his honor in tatters, and stormed from the room. He did not pack. He did not say goodbye. He ran to the stables, his heart a storm of grief, betrayal, and rage. He harnessed his 4 fastest, wild-eyed horses to his lightest war chariot. He would go to the wilderness, to the mountains. He would never return. He whipped the horses, and the chariot thundered out of the city gates, racing along the high, winding coastal road. He drove with a reckless despair, the sea on one side, the cliffs on the other. He was racing, the horses at a full panicked gallop, when the sea boiled. The water, which had been calm, suddenly churned. And from the white foam, a creature erupted. It was a bull. A monstrous bull, made of sea foam and old, green water, its eyes burning with the cold, ancient rage of the ocean god. It was the same divine terror that had cursed this family from the very beginning. It rose from the waves and roared. Julian's horses, wild and half-tamed themselves, went insane with terror. They screamed, rearing and pulling against the chariot. Julian, a master horseman, fought for control, but it was useless. The divine terror was too great. The horses veered, blind with panic. The chariot slammed, hard, into a jagged outcrop of rock. The sound of splintering wood and bone was absolute. Julian was thrown, his body cartwheeling through the air, before crashing onto the sharp, black rocks by the shore. The sea bull, its work done, submerged and was gone. There was only the sound of the waves and the screams of the dying horses. Prince Julian, his body broken and his innocence destroyed, lay bleeding on the stones, the tide rising around him. King Theo stood in his throne room, the echo of his own terrible judgment still ringing in the air. His son was banished. His wife was dead. He, the king, had acted. He had purged his house of the guilty. He had delivered his cold, hard justice. He was a pillar of iron, but he was hollow inside. He had done his duty, and it had cost him the last person in his family. He stood in the terrible silence, waiting for his heart to feel anything. It felt nothing, just cold. In the corner, the old Cretan nurse, the architect of this ruin, was huddled, her body rocking back and forth in a silent, private madness. She had helped her queen die. She had damned the prince. She was trapped. The heavy doors of the throne room burst open. A palace guard, his armor rattling, his face sheet white with panic, stumbled in and fell to his knees. "My king," he panted. "My king, the prince. Prince Julian." Theo's body went rigid. "He is banished. He is not a prince of mine." "What of him?" "His chariot, my lord," the guard stammered, fighting for breath. "The coastal road. He was driving, like a madman. A fisherman. He saw it. A thing, my king. A monster, a great bull. It came from the sea. Right from the water." Theo's blood ran cold. A bull. From the sea. The curse. The old, original curse of his house, the one that had begun with his ancestor, King Marcus, and the white bull of Poseidon. "The horses, they panicked," the guard continued, his voice breaking. "The chariot, it is destroyed, my king. It's a wreck upon the rocks. The prince, the healers are running, my lord, but they say he is dying." As the guard's words fell, the old nurse let out a sound. It was not a wail. It was a high, thin, animal shriek, a sound of a soul tearing in two. "No, no, 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 no," she gibbered, scrambling to her feet. "What have we done? What has she done?" She ran, stumbling, to the king, her eyes wild with a terror that was beyond reason. "My king, my lord Theo, you must listen. It was a lie. Get this woman out of my sight," Theo commanded, his voice shaking, his eyes fixed on the guard, his mind on the sea bull. "And no," the nurse shrieked, clawing at his arm. "You must know the truth. The queen, your wife, she lied. He is innocent. What is this madness?" Theo said, grabbing her by the shoulders. "It was her," the nurse confessed, the words pouring out in a torrent of guilty, hysterical sobs. "It was a curse, my king. A god's curse. Venus. She made the queen. She made her love him. A sick, profane love, like her mother's. She was dying from the shame of it." I. Theo was frozen, the guard's words and the nurse's words combining in his head to form a new, unspeakable horror. I told him," the nurse cried. "I told the prince. I thought I could save her. I told him of her love." Theo's mind flashed back to Julian's furious, confused words. "She is a corruption. It was the opposite. And he rejected her," the nurse wailed. "He was disgusted. He called her filth, a disease. He said he was coming to you, my king, to tell you the truth. And she, the queen, she heard him. She heard it all. She was terrified. She was shamed. The note was a lie. She wrote it to save herself, to strike him down before he could strike her. He is innocent, my king. He is innocent." The words hit Theo like a physical blow. He let go of the nurse. He stumbled back. He saw it. He saw it all in one, single, soul-crushing, blinding instant. The lie. The curse. Julian's proud, furious, and yet confused denial. The boy's inability to speak the filthy truth. The sea bull. The ocean god. The curse, finding its final victim. He, King Theo, in his cold, arrogant, blind justice, had believed the lie of a cornered, cursed woman over the sworn honor of his own son. He had banished him. He had sent him to his death. He had, just like his father, been undone by a simple, terrible mistake. He had not just killed his father. He had now murdered his son. What have I done?" he whispered. He did not wait. He did not speak. He shoved the guard and the weeping nurse aside and he ran. He was no longer a king. He was a father. He ran from the throne room, a primal, animal sound of denial tearing from his own throat. He bolted through the palace, his armor clattering, pushing aside the shocked servants, and burst into the courtyard. He grabbed the nearest horse, a guard stallion, and mounted it, digging his heels in, galloping wildly out of the city gates. He raced down the coastal road, the wind tearing at his face, his own tears, the first in long cold years, blinding him. He found him. The wreck was horrific. The chariot was splinters. The horses were a tangle of death on the rocks. And his son, his beautiful, wild, pure-hearted son, was lying on the black, wet stones, the tide rising around him. "Julian!" Theo roared. He leapt from the horse, sliding down the sharp embankment, cutting his hands. He ran to his son's side. Julian's body was broken. He was still, somehow, breathing. "My son! My son!" Theo cried, gathering his child's broken form into his arms. He cradled his son's head, brushing the bloody, matted hair from his face. "Julian, I am here." Julian's eyes, dull with pain, fluttered open. He saw his father. He did not look angry. He just looked tired. "Father!" He gasped, a trickle of blood at his lips. "I know," Theo choked, his voice breaking. "I know the truth, Julian. The nurse, she confessed. It was all a lie. All of it. Forgive me. My son, my child, forgive my blindness. Forgive my rage. Forgive me." Julian looked at his father, at this great, cold king, now weeping, his armor stained with his son's blood. He tried to summon the strength to smile. It was not your fault, father," Julian whispered. "Nor hers. It was the goddess. Venus, she has her revenge for my pride. I will build you a temple." Theo promised, incoherently. I will do anything." "No." Julian's breath was shallow. He looked up, past his father, at the empty blue sky. The huntress, she calls me home, to the quiet woods." His eyes lost their focus, and with a final shuddering sigh, Prince Julian died in his father's arms. For a long time, King Theo did not move. He just knelt on the sharp, wet rocks, the tide rising around his knees, holding the body of his only son. The slayer of the Minotaur, the defender of Athens, the uniters of kingdoms. He had won every battle. He had defeated every monster. And now he was kneeling on a cold shore, having lost his father to his own forgetfulness, his wife to a curse, and his son to his own blind and terrible justice. He was the king of everything, and he was completely, finally, and utterly alone. King Theo did not return to the palace for 3 days. He sat on that cold, windswept shore, holding his son's body, until his own guards finally, gently, pried his arms away. The funeral for Prince Julian was a silent, gray affair, a stark contrast to the angry, fiery pyre of King Evan. This was not a king's tragedy. This was a father's empty, hollow grief. Years passed. The man who ruled Athens was a shell. King Theo, the slayer, was now known as King Theo, the Grim. He was a great king. His city was a fortress, his fleet an armada. He was wise, he was fair. But he was a man without joy, without family, and without light. He was a ghost on his own throne, haunted by the memory of a black sail, a Cretan princess, and a young man's broken body on a rocky shore. He was the greatest king of his age, and he was the loneliest man in the world. His only connection to his past, to the man he had once been, was his friendship with King Patrick of the Labyrinth. One winter, a messenger arrived from the north. King Patrick's wife, the beautiful Queen Diane, whom they had saved from the centaurs, had been taken by a sudden, swift fever. She was dead. Weeks later, Patrick himself arrived in Athens. He was not the boisterous, laughing, red-bearded King Theo remembered. His friend was a mirror of himself, a hollow-eyed, grieving widower. The two kings sat in the great, empty hall of the Athenian palace, a place that had seen so much death. They were no longer young heroes. They were middle-aged men, powerful, feared, and utterly broken by fate. "They leave us with nothing, Theo," Patrick said, his voice a low rasp. He had been drinking heavily, but the wine gave him no joy, only a dark, simmering rage. "I fought monsters for her. You fought monsters for your city. And what do we have? Empty beds. Empty thrones. The gods, they are cruel, and they are careless. They take what is ours." "They are the gods, Patrick," Theo said, his voice flat. "We are just men. Are we?" Patrick slammed his cup on the table. "We are the sons of heroes. We are the slayers of beasts. We are kings. Are we to just sit here and accept this? Wait for our own empty deaths. What else is there? Patrick leaned in, his eyes burning with a new, wild, and dangerous light. A hubris born of absolute despair. They have taken our mortal wives. Let us, then, take wives of divine blood. Let us take daughters of the gods themselves. Theo looked at his friend, concerned. Patrick, you are grieving. You are not speaking sense. I have never been more sane. Patrick roared. A final adventure, Theo. A pact between us. We are the two greatest heroes left alive. We will prove it. We will take what we are owed. This is madness, Theo said. Is it? Patrick smiled, a grim, terrifying smile. You are a widower. I am a widower. I say we go, and we take new brides. I have already chosen mine. And who is this unfortunate woman, Theo asked, who has caught the eye of a mad king? Patrick's voice dropped. The daughter of the gods. The one they say is the most beautiful of all. The one who spends half her year in the darkness. I, King Patrick, will have no less than the queen of the dead herself. I will have Persephone. Theo recoiled. Persephone, the wife of Pluto. You are not just mad. You are suicidal. You speak of marching into the underworld and abducting the bride of the god of the dead. Exactly. Patrick stood, his arms wide. And who better to walk into the darkness with me than the man who has already done it? The slayer of the Minotaur. The man who walked out of the Labyrinth. Theo should have said no. The king he had become, the cold, logical ruler, knew this was folly. It was a blasphemous, childish, and doomed quest. But the man inside the king, the broken father, the lonely husband, he was so very tired. He looked at his friend's mad, grieving face, and he saw a reflection. He saw a final, glorious, and perhaps welcome end. To walk into the dark one last time. To challenge the gods themselves. It was the only thing that had made him feel alive in a decade. A final adventure, brother, Theo said, a slow, grim smile touching his own lips for the first time in years. To the darkness. One last time. The pact was sealed. They left their kingdoms to their regents. Two kings, armed not for war, but for a burglary, they traveled to the rumored ends of the earth. They found a hidden place, a dark, sulphurous cave in a desolate, sunless valley. It was the entrance to the underworld. The air grew cold. The light of the sun vanished, replaced by a dead, phosphorescent glow. They journeyed down, into the black, silent land of the dead. They saw the spirits, the gray, whispering shades of heroes and commoners, all equal, all empty. They came to a great, black, oily river. The boatman, a skeletal, hooded figure, barred their path. No living, he hissed. Patrick, in his arrogance, simply tossed him a bag of solid gold. We are not here to stay, boatman. We are here on royal business. The boatman, Sharon, his empty socket staring at the gold, took them across. The black water of the Styx lapped at the hull. They passed the great, three-headed hound, Cerberus. The beast growled, its 3 sets of fangs dripping with venom. But Patrick, who had brought provisions, threw the beast 3 great, drugged sides of beef. The dog ate and fell into a heavy, unnatural sleep. They were in. They had breached the final fortress. They walked through the desolate fields of asphodel, 2 living, breathing, warm-bodied men in a kingdom of cold shadows. They finally came to the palace of the god of the dead. It was a fortress of black, obsidian glass, built on a cliff overlooking a river of fire. They walked, their mortal footsteps echoing loud and obscene in the dead silence, into the great throne room. At the far end, on a throne carved from a single black diamond, sat the king of the dead. He was not a monster. He was a god. Majestic, terrible, and as cold as the grave. His face was beautiful, but utterly without joy. This was Pluto, the lord of all, the master of the final labyrinth. And beside him, on a smaller silver throne, sat his beautiful, sad-eyed queen, Persephone. Pluto looked at the 2 living mortals who had dared to walk into his hall. His voice when he spoke was not a sound, but a feeling, a coldness that vibrated in their bones. King Theo of Athens, the god said. Slayer of the Minotaur. King Patrick of the Lapiths. Slayer of the Centaurs. He leaned forward, his shadowy face a mask of cold curiosity. You are the first to arrive here, living, who were not summoned. Your arrogance is impressive. Why have you come? Theo, for the first time, felt true, divine terror. He realized the sheer, catastrophic folly of their quest. But Patrick, his heart still full of that wild human grief, was not afraid. He He stepped forward, his voice booming, an echo of the man he once was. "We are here," he declared, "for your wife." The throne room of the dead was utterly silent. King Pluto, the lord of the underworld, did not move. His wife, Queen Persephone, merely watched, her face a mask of sad, cold beauty. The two living, breathing, warm-blooded kings stood in the vast, cold hall, their audacity hanging in the air. Patrick's demand, "We are here for your wife," echoed and died. Finally, King Pluto's thin lips parted, and a smile touched his face. It was a smile of pure, cold, ancient ice. It held no humor. It held only amusement. "For my wife," he repeated, his voice a dry rustle, like sand pouring into a grave. "King Patrick, you, who could not even hold onto your own mortal bride, now come for mine. You are brave. You are, in fact, the bravest men I have ever had the pleasure of hosting." He rose from his black throne. "You have come so far. A hero's journey. You have crossed the Styx. You have tamed my dog. And you have walked living into my hall. You must be tired. Terribly tired." He gestured, his long pale hand pointing to two simple, unadorned stone chairs at the foot of his dais. They looked like seats for weary petitioners. "Please," the god of the dead said, his voice laced with a terrible, false hospitality. "Sit. Rest yourselves. Let us discuss this proposal of yours as equals." Theo's heart, which he thought was too broken to feel fear, suddenly went cold. He knew with the same certainty that he had known the centaurs were dangerous, that this was a trap. This was the final labyrinth, and these were the wrong steps. "Patrick," he whispered, "no, we do not sit." But Patrick, his mind so clouded by grief and arrogance, saw only a god who was negotiating. He saw a god who was impressed. "See, Theo," he laughed, a short, sharp, barking sound in the dead hall. "He respects us. He is a reasonable god." Patrick, in his hubris, strode forward. "Thank you, Lord Pluto," he said, as if he were in his own hall. And he slumped, exhausted, into the stone chair. Theo watched, horrified. He was bound by his oath. He could not abandon his friend. With a deep, shuddering sigh of resignation, King Theo, the slayer, sat in the second chair. The moment his flesh touched the stone, he knew. A cold, not like ice, but like the absence of heat, shot up his legs. He tried to stand. He could not. He was bound. He looked down. The stone of the chair, which had looked solid, was alive. It was growing, wrapping around his legs, his hips, his arms, fusing with his very flesh, pulling him down. Patrick roared, struggling, his own massive strength useless. What sorcery is this? Release us." "It is no sorcery," King Pluto said, his cold smile widening. "It is the chair of forgetfulness. It is the seat of my hospitality. You have come to my house, seeking my queen? Then you shall be my guests. And you will sit, and you will wait, and you will forget. You will forget your grief. You will forget your kingdoms. You will forget your names. You will be at peace." From the shadows, dark, winged shapes with snakes for hair, the Furies emerged, and they began to laugh, their voices like cracking whips. The trap was sprung. The two greatest heroes of the living world were now prisoners, forever, in the land of the dead. Time passed. Or perhaps it did not. In the underworld, there is no sun, no moon. There is only the endless, gray, twilight. Theo and Patrick sat, bound to their stone chairs, as the shades of the dead drifted past them like smoke. They were alive, but they were not. They felt the cold. They felt the despair. And worst of all, they felt the curse of the chairs, the slow, creeping, mental fog. Their memories began to fray. The face of Julian, the sound of his father's leap, the black sail, it was all turning to dust. They sat for an age. Their beards grew long and matted. Their muscles withered. They were becoming statues. And then, one day, there was a new sound. A living sound. The sound of a true, roaring, mortal voice. The sound of a battle. A new hero had come to the underworld. A massive warrior, his skin tanned, his muscles straining, wearing the hide of a lion and carrying a great olive wood club, was dragging the three-headed dog, Cerberus, by a chain. This was Hercules, the strongest of all. As he passed the throne room, he saw the two trapped kings. He stopped. "By the gods," he boomed. "Kinsman Theo? Patrick? What is this?" "Hercules," Theo whispered, his mind struggling back from the fog. "Help us. Please, we were fools." He holds us, Patrick moaned, his wild eyes now dull and broken. He holds us. Hercules, his own impossible quest complete, was not afraid of a god. He strode to the throne of Pluto. Lord of the dead, he said, I have your dog. As payment, I ask for these two. They are my friends. Pluto looked at the son of Zeus. He knew he could not deny him. Not entirely. What the grave holds, it holds, little godling, Pluto hissed. But if you have the strength to take them, then they are yours to take. Hercules grinned. He went to Theo first. He planted his feet. He gripped Theo's hands. This will hurt, he said. And he pulled. There was a sound like a mountain cracking. A sound of stone tearing, and of flesh ripping from bone. Theo screamed, a sound of agony and finally, of release. With a final, monstrous heave, Hercules ripped Theo free from the chair of forgetfulness. Theo collapsed, his legs bloody, his mind reeling, but free. The chair had kept a part of him. He would be Lamed forever. But he was free. Hercules turned to Patrick. He grabbed his hands. He set his feet and pulled. The underworld shook. The black obsidian palace cracked. The Furies shrieked. A roar of pure, divine negation echoed from the throne. Enno, boomed the voice of Pluto. The other, yes. He was a follower. But this one, he was the blasphemer. He was the one who came for my queen. He stays. Hercules pulled again, but the stone would not yield. It held Patrick fast. Patrick looked at Theo, his friend, who was free. And in his eyes, Theo saw the last spark of the man he knew. Go, brother, Patrick whispered, his voice already fading back into the fog. Go. It is my doom. It is just. He let go of Hercules' hands. I cannot, Theo wept. Go. Hercules commanded, grabbing the Lamed, weeping Theo. It is his choice. We cannot save him. Hercules, the strongest hero, dragged the weakest, broken one. He dragged Theo back across the fields of asphodel, back across the river Styx, and back up the dark, winding, sulphurous path. And then, after an eternity in the gray, Theo saw it. The sun. It was so bright, so warm, it was an agony. He collapsed on the living earth, a free man, an old man, a man who had been to hell and back. His final journey was the long, slow, limping walk back to Athens. He had been gone, he learned, for almost a decade.